Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku became a butterfly and flapped his wings to create a tsunami? A special shout out to the original creator. Please make sure to show your support by checking out their work from the description. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Quirkless. One word and everything changed for Izuku. He'd always thought he'd get a quirk as cool as Kaken's and the two of them would be the best hero duo of all time. When he got home from that doctor visit, Izuku was devastated. He couldn't be a hero if he didn't have a quirk, that much was painfully obvious. So, determined to be useful somehow else, he did some research. He'd always been interested in quirks and loved to pick them apart, analyze them. His favorite quirk up until now was Kaken's, and although the explosive blonde didn't like his recommendations and analyses and found them creepy and weird, he made big progress over the years. Even though Izuku would inevitably be beaten to the ground every time he mumbled or offered help with his classmates' quirks and ideas for support items, he didn't stop. He wanted to be useful, not a useless Deku. At the age of 4, Izuku's world shattered and he rebuilt it with a new goal. At the delicate age of 8 years, he found a passion in building things from scratch or modifying things to be more to his liking. At 9 years old, he modified his phone to last more than 4 days straight, built himself earphones that were invisible to the eye. He would either work at a support company and design items or maybe even be the head of a company, or he would be an analyst specializing in quirks. But he would definitely help the heroes in any way he could, with or without quirk. Either way, to do that, he had to go to UA. It had been his dream to go there since he could remember, and honestly, now at 14 years old he wasn't really that interested in becoming a hero anyway. He grew to love building and tinkering with stuff others called trash and has made up his mind a long time ago. And that leads to now, the day of the entrance exam. Growing up with Bakugo had been a pain, so to say. Izuku had realized that, after Bakugo told him to go and take a swan dive off the roof and pray to get a quirk in his next life, the angry Pomeranian wasn't his friend and therefore he stopped calling him Kaken or Katsuki. He saw him as his previous classmate, a bully, and simply tolerated him, avoided him as much as possible. Bakugo was always mad at Izuku no matter what the greenette did, and be it only breathing too loudly. That fact made him jump into a bush in front of the gates as he heard him yelling at other applicants to move out of the way some distance behind him. He really didn't want to deal with Bakugo today, especially if he had an entrance exam to pass. He'd studied like a madman for today, registered in online classes which covered every single subject's topics up until second year of high school, and he had honed his building skills by tinkering around in his room with scraps and every single thing he found in the mountains of trash on Dagoba Beach. He was ready as he could be and nobody was going to stop him from acing this test. Power Loader was, well, impressed. Yeah, impressed is a good word. Maybe even fascinated at how a teenager could build something as impressive as the object lying in front of him. It wasn't big in size, in fact, it was only the size of his palm. And it was working just as the blueprints provided by the student indicated it would. There were no errors or malfunctions whatsoever. At first glance, it looked like a plain old power bank. However, it had a button on it. To use that button though, one had to use their fingerprint to unlock the safety measures. That teenager managed to design, build and program a high-tech item in only 6 hours. 6 hours? Power Loader would have needed 9 to 10 hours at least to come up with all of this and build it. Not to forget the programming. That thing could project things into midair, onto walls, had its own AI, maybe a sloppy, rushed one but still functioning, a tracking device, Bluetooth, almost anything one could possibly think of. And the real game changer is that that little box was foldable and rearrangeable. It was rearrangeable into a weapon, a dagger, to be exact. When pointing that dagger at someone, it scanned that person from head to toe and saved all their personal information such as name, medical history, quirk, you name it in the user of the weapon's chosen cloud. The sheer amount of precision left him speechless and damn, he wanted that kid in his class. Only judging that kid's preciseness, he was convinced that that teenager would pass the written portion of the exam in flying colors. Or at least he hoped so. Now, Everything he could do was wait for the exams to be corrected and let fate decide what would happen. Izuku was worried. Well, worried is an understatement. Quite a big one, actually. He was a nervous wreck and has had 6 anxiety attacks in the last 4 days. He couldn't even concentrate on anything, not on tinkering and especially not on analyzing. Hell, he was overanalyzing everything he could have done wrong on the test, both practical and written. In the written portion, he didn't have any problems except for a few questions in history, and he was the first one to finish. And every time he looked around, he saw the faces of the other students. Some were visibly struggling, some were even silently crying, and some others looked really puzzled sometimes. But he saw nobody flying through the questions as easily and relaxed as Izuku had. And oh, Kami, was he concerned. He was just about to walk another round through his room in a never-ending circle as somebody shouted from the kitchen. Izuku, stop worrying for a few minutes and come set the table for dinner. Sighing deeply, he went to the kitchen and started his task. At least his mother supported him with everything he did. Of course, she had been as devastated as he had been that he couldn't be a hero, but she was just as much delighted that he had found a new passion to pursue. However, knowing that he would be at a disadvantage against others, she quickly signed him up for self-defense classes when he was 6. She was a worrier, always had been, and she wanted her child to be able to know what to do if somebody would try to hurt him on his way to school. Those classes were so much fun that Izuku almost begged to be enrolled into some kind of martial arts club, and at age 7 he started out at first with kung fu, then next to that karate, and because he really disliked punching people, because Bakugo always did that to him, he tried out taekwondo, and up until today he goes to the meetups every week consistently. As a mandatory after-school activity he had chosen parkour because why not? The reason he hadn't chosen crafts or chemics was because both of those teachers were the more quirkiest ones and Izuku tried to avoid them in general. The little inventor was very grateful to his mother and never wanted to make her worry more than she already did. The only thing he absolutely hated about her was the looks she gave him. As if he were made of glass, some china that was bound to break after holding it too tightly. A bit too much pressure and crash, he'd crumble. But he learned to ignore them, even if they hurt more than the burn scars littering his back. Izuku, whatever the outcome of the exam will be, you can be sure that I will support you. Do you understand? Looking up from his bowl of miso soup, the teenager met his mother's eyes. Sighing, he responded, I know that I can count on you. I just can't seem to stop worrying that I might have messed up. I know, baby, but even if you didn't get into the support course you also made an application for Gen Ed as a safety measure. Everything will be fine. Falling back into comfortable silence, they ate their dinner and Izuku retreated to his room after washing the dishes. Having 2 anxiety attacks in the span of 1 day was very exhausting, and soon he succumbed to sleep. Maybe tomorrow his letter would come? Okay, I'm hallucinating. Izuku was standing in front of the gates of UA High School. He was actually standing in front of UA High School's gates. His soul had practically left his body when he got the letter informing him of his acceptance, but he never would have imagined that the inclusion of quirkless people wasn't just a pretend UA held up because of the media, but they actually stuck to their word. No, Izuku. Don't get carried away. They could just let you marvel in your dream school for 1 day and expel you. Izuku bitterly thought to himself. Yeah, he needed to stay realistic. And most definitely not stand out. Nothing good ever happens when he stands out. He learned that in middle school the hard way. But this isn't middle school, it's UA. And everything will be fine. As long as he didn't give the teachers a reason to look up his files and find out about his quirklessness, he'd be fine. Yes, this was a new start and everything would be different. Taking a deep breath, he adjusted his tie, which he miserably failed to tie, and blazer, and took the first step inside the gates and officially on the grounds of UA. Time for a new start. Just how big is this place? The greenette hurriedly padded through the endless maze of UA and was growing desperate in trying to find his classroom 1H. The fact that he couldn't find any kind of reception point or something didn't help his situation either, and he found himself standing in front of a layout plan for the 6th time in the last 30 minutes. Suddenly he was really grateful that his mother had insisted he take the train half an hour earlier than the one he'd normally have taken. However, he was getting anxious. What if he were too late on the first day? What if the teacher was so strict that he'd immediately be expelled because of his tardiness? Don't think about it too much now. That is a problem for future Izuku, not present Izuku. Calm down and go find your classroom. Redirecting his gaze to the map, he quickly memorized the route and started off again. Finally, after another 10 minutes of walking, he found a hallway with many big doors on one side, the other being a ceiling-high wall made out of glass, with a view over Mizudafu. Walking to the very end of the hallway, he finally found the classrooms of the first years of the support course. Just as he wanted to open the door, which had one H imprinted on it, he was suddenly blown back forcefully. His vision blurred with white and his ears rang painfully because of the volume. Instinctively, he snapped his eyes shut and shielded his head with his arms, curling himself into a ball midair. With a solid thud, he made impact with the glass wall on the opposing side of the door he stood in front of just a moment ago, and his breath was forced out of his lungs painfully. What the hell? That clearly was an explosion just now. An explosion mean that Bakugo was there. But what was Bakugo doing here at the support course department of the school, on the opposite side of the school nonetheless? No, it couldn't be. Please no, not today, not on my first day of school, please Cammy have mercy. Why me? Oh, for Cammy's sake, Hatsume. I told you 20 seconds ago to not touch anything until I instruct you to do so, and now, you managed to blow off the door. Hopefully nobody was outside just now. Izuku was abruptly pulled out of his thoughts at the raised voice coming from inside the room, and quick footsteps rang out, approaching rapidly. Sorry, sensei, I was just so excited to make some babies, I couldn't wait. The second voice sounded very feminine and not at all sorry. Slowly the dust and smoke dissolved. Oh my, are you okay? See what you did, somebody was outside the door after all. The burnt door was quickly lifted off Izuku. Wait, it was on me the whole time? No wonder everything felt so heavy, and carefully blinking, the teenager opened his eyes to meet blue eyes. Those were framed with shoulder-long ginger hair, and the person had a worried look on their face. Shifting slowly, he got up to a sitting position and moved his hand to his ears. They were still ringing violently and his head hurt from the impact. Are you okay? Does anything hurt? He looked up again into these navy eyes. Yes, sir, I'm okay, nothing I can't handle. Just a bit startled is all. Okay, that's good. Does anything hurt? I don't really know what happened here in the hallway, but judging by the door which was laying on top of you, you must have been blown quite a distance. The man's facial expression was stern but not scolding, odd enough, and the way he phrased his question didn't leave much room to argue. Yeah, I was just about to open the door when it flew off its hinges and it sent me flying against the glass, but I shielded myself, so it's fine. I'm fine really. Cammy, he didn't want to start his first school day pissing off a teacher and making them send him to the infirmary. Hell no. Are you sure? He didn't sound convinced. Supporting himself against the wall, he got back to his feet, sending a reassuring smile to the adult. Yes, I'm sure. I'm sorry to have caused you worry. The man straightened and composed himself. I'm Higuri Maijima, also known as the excavation hero, power loader, but you can call me Maijima-sensei. What's your name? Remembering that he forgot to introduce himself, he quickly bowed down. Midoriya Izuku. Please get up. I still don't know if you have any head injuries and would like to check that. Midoriya, you said? Looks like you're in my class. Come on, let's get inside. Go ahead and sit down on the teacher's chair in the front. The teacher's chair? Oh, Cammy, and I didn't want to draw any attention and now I have to sit on the teacher's chair? Knowing that there was no room for argument, he complied and went inside. Somebody had already opened the windows and the smoke was almost gone, only the smell still lingered in the air. He hesitantly sat down and watched Power Load dash, no, Maijima-sensei, pull out a first aid kit and rummage through it, taking a flashlight. Then he went ahead and shone it into the boy's eyes. Good, it doesn't seem like you have a concussion, that's a relief. Do you feel any bruises forming somewhere from the impact? He doesn't know why, but he didn't dare lie. My left shoulder hurts a bit. He looked down on the floor, avoiding Maijima-sensei's eyes. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move your arm a bit. I'm gonna grab it now. There wasn't any kind of disappointment in his voice and Izuku was bewildered. Normally teachers would tell him to suck it up and go to his seat already, but the man in front of him didn't. Strange. Gentle hands carefully moved and rotated it around. Okay, it doesn't seem like anything's broken or damaged, and you can stay here in class for the rest of the day. However, I want you to go to the infirmary either at lunch break or after school. And I will know if you went there or not. Watching the teacher's strict eyes, he nodded his agreement and was dismissed to find his seat. He was number 5 and finally got to take a better look at the room. It was very different but kind of the same as in any other school. The only difference is that even though the room was the same size as the other classrooms he had the chance to peek into, this one had less desks in it. They were bigger too. If he had to guess, one table took up as much space as 3 normal ones would, and the chairs weren't made out of the typical blue fabric he'd seen, but made out of something that looked like some sort of fabric, but still also kind of like metal? He'd have to look into it later. Many different machines were lined up around the room, and the projector for presentations was encaged, probably because of the risk of damage. The desks themselves didn't really look normal either. The surface wasn't made out of wood like in the rest of the classes, but something sturdier, and on the sides were various buttons. There were a total of 10 desks in here, including the teacher's desk, and the numbers went from the left side starting with 1, going back towards the end of the class to number 3, and started again in the middle row in the front with number 4. Padding to the desk in the middle, he tried to make peace with the fact that he's in the center of the class and not somewhere on the side like he had hoped he would be. Setting down his yellow backpack, he sat down and looked around. In front of him was a girl with pink dreadlocks and some kind of goggles on her head and golden eyes with black rings around her pupils. To her right was a person he wasn't sure he wanted to assume their gender because they looked very androgynous. They had brown hair with moss green streaks in them. The haircut itself was short, their ears poked out of their waves which ended right above the ears, and the back was shaved in a triangle shape with a geometrical pattern shaved into it. The ears themselves were pointed and kind of looked like an elf's ears. In the front were 2 longer strands not quite long enough to brush their shoulders, both braided with some kind of pearls and rings incorporated. Their eyes were mirroring their hair, one brown and one green. On the left side of the girl with the pink hair is a girl with slightly wavy, light blue hair in one French braid, tan skin and orange eyes with long fingers. Behind her and next to Izuku is a boy with short black hair, ghostly white skin and gray eyes. His whole appearance kind of reminds the greenette of the night. On his right side is a boy with long, straight blonde hair in a neat bun, chocolate brown flawless skin, and blue eyes. Behind him is one of 2 girls that look almost identical to each other. Both have sky blue skin, clouds for hair and black eyeballs. The only difference is that one of them has a black snowflake in her hair and silver eyes, the other one a black lightning and golden eyes. The last one is diagonally behind Izuku in the left corner of the room and has red hair currently put up in 2 space buns and equally as red eyes. The freckled boy noticed that this class was above average when it came to visible mutations. Normally only about 10% of one class had something visible, but here in this class there was 1 person who could extract their fingers, 2 with clouds for hair, and 1 with ghostly skin that was almost transparent, so pale was it. Just as he started to wonder what all of their quirks could be, the bell rang and signaled the beginning of homeroom. Good morning everyone, my name is Higuri Maijima, but you might know me under my hero name, the excavation hero, Power Loader. Please just call me either Maijima-sensei or Power Loader-sensei. I'm fine with any of those too. Now, I'll go through attendance. Whoever hears their name will acknowledge me by saying something they like or enjoy doing. Ueno Soma? The girl with light blue hair and orange eyes directly in front of Maijima-sensei stands up. Hello everyone, my name is Ueno Soma. I'm 15 years old and I really like shiny things. Hatsume. The girl with the pink dreadlocks in front of him practically shoots up from her seat. Hi, I'm Hatsume. I'm 15 years old and I love making babies. Izuku almost choked on his own spit at that. Making babies? What the hell? We're teenagers. Maijima-sensei sighed. Hatsume, you do know that not everybody refers to their support items and inventions as babies, right? A collective sigh of relief was heard from all over the room, and Hatsume sat back down with a pout on her face. Miyazaki Haru? The androgynous person stands up. My name is Miyazaki Haru. I'm also 15 years old and I really enjoy mountain climbing and hiking in the nature. Nakamura-sana? The boy with deathly pale skin and short black hair calmly gets up. My name is Nakamura-sana. I'm 15 and I really like yoga and meditating. Midoriya Izuku? Oh Kami, now it's his turn. Nervously he stands up, taking a deep breath he introduces himself. My name is Midoriya Izuku. I'm also 15 years old and I really like katsudon. Finally letting out a breath he knew he was holding, he sat back down. Holy shit, that was scary. How can people actually like speaking in front of other people? Kaneko-K? The blonde-haired boy next to him arises. The name's Kaneko-K, 15 and I really like designing hero costumes. Before you ask, I didn't go into the costume department of UA because I prefer building support items over sewing. Toma Takeda? The redhead with 2 space buns and red eyes stands up. I'm Takeda Toma, 15 years old and I really like cooking. Kimura Yuki? One of the possible twins stands up, the one with silver irises and a snowflake in her hair. Hello, my name is Kimura Yuki and I am the twin sister of the girl next to me, Sora. Please just call us our first names so nobody gets confused. We are both 15 years old Oswell and I really like reading. Kimura Sora? Like she said, and I really like dancing. After looking over everybody and ticking off every name on his list, the teacher ushers them out of the classroom. They walk down every single emergency exit, and all the while the adult explains what they can and can't do on campus. For example, there are separate gyms for every department of UA. It is preferred from the school if every student who wanted to work out went to their own gym, but it is not required. However, only the hero course was allowed in the simulation tracks, like the simulation cities, the simulation forest, etc., since most of the time those students have more flashy or damaging quirks than others and are a potential safety hazard for other students. All of the other facilities of UA are always open for use and free of charge. The only thing they had to do was to inform their homeroom teacher, or if they are not available another one, that they would be using that specific room and for how long. There was always the option to go to the school counselor Hound Dog if somebody wanted to talk about something that was troubling them, etc. And that would be all of the emergency exits you need to know about for now. Also, Hatsume? The pink-cat snapped her attention back to Power Loader Sensei after almost running into an opening door. Yes? Can we please hurry this up and go back to class so I can start on some new babies? I just got a new idea after watching a girl facepalm onto the floor outside, and I think I could build a baby for enhanced balance. Oh, maybe I can add dash. Yes, I know that you're excited, but please listen to me carefully. Away from the explosives. Understand? Rolling her eyes, the girl looks at him, almost feral grin still intact. Yeah, whatever. Can we go now? Please. Maidama-sensei let out a long, almost suffering breath. Fine. Hatsume let out an excited squeal right next to his ear, and suddenly her attention was on Izuku as she bombarded him with questions. Hey, I'm Hatsume, but you already know that because of the introductory round we did back in homeroom. Hey, wanna go and make some babies together? I have a gut feeling that you will be the perfect partner for testing all of them out since you don't have a mutation quirk, except maybe your hair does something because it's green? Or maybe you have a mental quirk. Wait a second, weren't you the one I blew up before homeroom started? Oh my Kami, it is you. Sorry for that, next time I'll warn you if something explodes again. Anyways, where were we? Yes, what's your quirk? I'm quirkless. Izuku was so hardly caught off guard that he couldn't think over the answer, and it was too late as the words slipped off his tongue. Eyes flying open, he tensed, step to step backwards. Shit, why did he say that? He was so useless, he couldn't even go one day in a new school with new people and he ruined everything again. Oh my god, really? That is so cool and rare. Yes, I knew you'd be a good partner, you're perfect. Hatsume practically beamed at him and he couldn't help but stare back. Why, you're not mad? Disgusted? You don't think I'm useless? He almost whispered in disbelief. He couldn't help it. Nobody except for his mother had ever reacted the way the Pinkette had. Hell, even his dad left for the milk as soon as he got wind of his diagnosis, and his former best friend turned to a full-blown bully and beat him to a pulp every damn day for it. So why was someone so positive and almost suffocated him with non-violent excitement? A small frown appeared on the girl's face. Useless? Nobody's useless. And you are the perfect representation for the standardized support item. With you as my tester, I don't have to take any quirks into account. That makes everything so much easier, and anyways, being quirkless is really rare in Japan too. Like, even though the average of all countries combined on the whole world says that 20% of the population is quirkless, in Japan it's only 2%. You're like really rare, almost as rare as healing quirks are. Your existence alone is incredible. And secondly, why would I be disgusted at another human being who hasn't done anything to me? It just doesn't make sense. The greenette's mouth hung open. As he realized that a girl had just complimented him over and over again, his face took on the color of a tomato, and while he tried his best to get Hatsume to calm down again, he didn't notice the concerned look on Maijima's face as he watched the whole thing display right before his nose. The almost whisper coming from the green-haired student he learned was named Midoriya Izuku was concerning, to say the least. Higuri knew that one of his students would be quirkless. He made it a habit years ago to go through every student's files before meeting them. As soon as he looked through Midoriya's file, he noticed his quirk status and did some research. And oh Kami, those were not good at all. The statistics showed that not even 10% of quirkless people in Japan lived past the age of 20 because of the sheer amount of discrimination, harassment, human trafficking, kidnapping, bullying, you name it. And those who did only had a 10% chance of being accepted into a good high school or university, and most of them were unemployed and died on the streets. The average estimated lifetime of a quirkless person was a mere 17 years. So to see the freckled boy completely in awe that somebody was nice to him tugged at something in his stomach. He would have to keep an eye out for Midoriya. He has a feeling that his life before UA wasn't a very pleasant experience. After answering all of the rapidly fired questions Hatsume sent Izuku's way while being dragged back to their classroom, the greenette sat down at his desk. He probably would never get used to not being berated and stepped on by somebody. And honestly, he didn't really mind that at all. It was a pleasant surprise to for once not being treated like shit. Hatsume and him were the first ones to arrive in the classroom, and the rest of the 9-pupil class filtered back in. Even though it looked like nobody except for the twins knew each other, everybody was talking to somebody. In front of him, the hyperactive girl was already tinkering with something she pulled out from who knows where and was like him, not talking to anybody. The elf person from before was talking to the calm boy, the one who reminded Izuku of the night. They both had an aura around them that practically screamed, "We are probably the most calm people in the whole school." The girl with the long fingers who introduced herself first was talking in the back of the class with the redhead. Both of them were talking animatedly about knives and how they were made out of which iron and that they were shiny. Oh well, Izuku has heard weirder conversations before, so he diverted his gaze to the twins, Yuki and Sora, both talking to the guy with blonde hair. He recalled his name was Kaneko-ke? Well, maybe something like that. The golden-eyed twin said something along the lines of how she loved dancing because it's so elegant but can also be brutal, and Kaneko seemed to say something about how his aura and her dancing would make a great combination for shows. Figuring it wouldn't hurt to socialize his antisocial but a bit, he took a deep breath, stood back up and walked over to Hatsume. He desperately hoped that she didn't lie to him to make him feel hopeful, but that train of thought quickly died down when he saw what she was fiddling with. Mainly because as soon as he arrived at her desk, she whipped around. Now, face to face with Hatsume, he saw the feral grin back on her face and gulped. "So, you interested in my baby? Wait, what was your name again?" "I'm not good with names, sorry." Taking a step back because she kind of invaded his personal space and he didn't really appreciate it, he replied. "Midoriya Izuku. I just wanted to take a look at what you're doing. You said something of a support item for enhanced balance before, and it got me thinking. How would you go about making it? Because if I'm on the same page as you, then I would probably make something like a sensor in the ear, where the main balance regulation point of the body is, and let it monitor everything. We just have to figure out how to make something so tiny and someone willing to actually get an implant, and then we could figure out what kind of item would be best suited and where on the body we would position it. Because if it were, for example, on the back or on the torso, it probably would get in the way with normal everyday clothes, but if it were on one of the limbs, it would maybe slow down movements." "What?" Izuku completely lost control of his never-ending mumbling and only realized as Hatsume had gotten very quiet and stared at him so intensely that he feared he might have weirded her out. What he didn't see coming though was the fact that she seemed to have understood him perfectly well and was now enthusiastically giving him her thoughts of every single question and suggestion he made. Figuring that maybe she wasn't so bad, he threw in some of his thoughts every time she said something that he hadn't thought of. They soon were discussing the potential support item, and both of them were so deep in thought that neither of them noticed the absolutely done look Majima-sensei was giving them. Oh hell no, now there's two of them. That sentence was almost written all over the man's face, and the students that noticed looked in between him and the hyper-duo and pitted the man's soon-to-be gray hair. Alright, class, homeroom and first period is over. I'll give you a 10-minute break, so be back at 9:40 to begin the second lesson of the day. While I'm gone, don't blow anything up dash. He gave a pointed look to Hatsume dash and actually eat or drink something. Next period we're gonna need all those brain cells of yours functioning at 100% because we'll be starting on how to professionally make blueprints because we have to start at square one. Now don't give me that look, Hatsume. Even though the teachers of UA have free reign over their schedule, we still have to cover all of the topics that are mandatory. I know that you all are very advanced already in many areas, so I will keep it short either way. No, go and try not to destroy this room while I'm not here. Reaching down to his backpack, he pulled out an energy bar and his water bottle, and sat on the edge of Hatsume's desk. Quietly munching, he looked around again. Up until now everything seemed fine. Sure, he was blown up before homeroom even began, but he got to know someone that didn't have a problem with his absence of a quirk, and the teacher didn't treat him any differently than the others yet. Of course, he would always be ready to be dropped by anybody. He wouldn't get his hopes up after the birthday cake incident in second grade middle school. Bakuga's lackeys had been especially nasty in pretending to have gotten him a birthday cake, and as he wanted to thank them they pushed it into his face. Some bits of the frosting stained his analysis notebook, and since then he learned his lesson. Never expect somebody to be care. They will drop you either out of spite or for entertainment. Anyways, he noticed that the elf person, Miyazaki, was walking up to him. Putting away his trash, he greeted them. Hi. You're Miyazaki, right? The student looked him over a bit, and Izuku held his breath. Were they quirkist? It wouldn't surprise him. After a few more tense seconds the other held out their hand. Yes, that's right. You're Midoriya, correct? The quirkless kid. He was surprised that even after scanning their face he didn't seem to find any kind of hostility, so he nodded. Oh cool. Well, I just wanted you to know that I go by they/them pronouns, so please respect that. I may be on the more feminine side since I just started taking hormone suppressants, but the more you know the better. You don't have a problem with that, do you? They critically eyed him and he hurriedly reassured them. Oh no, of course I have no problem with that. I already thought that you might be NB since you look really androgynous. Also, it won't be an issue at all since I already know someone who goes by they/them pronouns and they explained everything to me, so if you ever need someone to talk to or someone to have your back you can just tell me. He tried to sound as convincing and trustworthy as possible and smiled at them. Which, thank Kami, they returned, a relieved expression settling on their face. Then, they turned and looked expectantly at Hatsume, who had been tinkering the whole time at her so-called baby that Izuku doubted she heard anything they just talked about. Just as he wanted to tap her shoulder, she spun around. Don't worry about me, I have a trans brother. He transitioned when I was 5, so I don't know what I am other than accepting. And with that she turned around again and refocused her attention to the small pile of wires and pliers. Miyazaki and Izuku both turned to look at each other and after a few seconds snorted at the face both of them were making. None of them had expected Hatsume to have paid attention at all. Well, it was kind of relieving for them to know that Hatsume and Izuku were allies, since they had already dealt with quite the amount of bullshit from others and the brown-green-haired person was happy to have somebody on their side. Thanking him, they turned and proceeded to go and talk to the rest of the class, and Izuku was just as relieved as them that they were accepting his quirk status as he was accepting their gender identity. Not that in the year 2 XXX that should be normal, but unfortunately both of them knew that society and the norm could be absolute assholes. The bell rang and after taking a final sip of water he went back to his seat and listened to Majima-sensei talk about blueprints, taking as many notes as possible to review later today. There wasn't really that much that was new to him, but better be safe than sorry and write everything down. Who knew if Sensei was the kind of teacher to do surprise pop quizzes? Just like that, they spent the 3 lessons before lunch, and Hatsume and Miyazaki both looked at each other, smiled, got up and almost dragged the greenette to sit with them at lunch. However, after seeing the sheer amount of people in the cafeteria, Miyazaki told them they weren't really good with crowds, and Izuku and Hatsume both agreed to take their lunch trays with them outside to find a nice spot. 5 minutes later they found a tree to their liking, and now they were munching on their lunches. The first to break the silence was Miyazaki. So, we already know that Midoriya doesn't have a quirk, but I wonder what yours is, Hatsume? Putting down her chopsticks, the pinkette replied. Oh, it's called zoom. Meaning that in a nutshell, my eyes can zoom in on anything as long as it's within a distance of 5 kilometers, 3.1 miles. It's really useful when making babies because I don't need a microscope for the small things like wires and shit. What's yours? Smiling, they raised a hand, revealing technological-looking lines all over their fingers and fading into the palm. My quirk is called detection. It's a touch-activated quirk that lets me detect flaws in programs, and most of the time, as long as it's not too complicated, it lets me know how to fix them. Oh really? That's so cool and useful dash. Oh my Kami, you guys have such great quirks? Izuku burst out. Just imagine what else you could do with them. I mean, with Zoom you could easily be a doctor for making out any irregularities in the cell of a body because you wouldn't need the machines necessary for seeing them, or even an information-gathering hero, or maybe you could be a spy for the government. Oh my god, do you feel it in your eyes when you zoom in and out, or do you not? And detection could be used in so many different ways I don't even know where to start. He snapped his head over to Miyazaki. You could be hired to look over the security systems of important places, maybe even UA. Or, Kami forbid, Tartarus? Holy quirks, this is really cool. Loud cackling, almost manic, ripped him out of his outburst, and he slapped a hand over his mouth. Oh no, he ruined everything. He was so stupid, just a useless waste of space, and now they were gonna hate him and think he was creepy, and damn, I wouldn't have thought about all of those options with my quirk, Midoriya. I never even considered becoming a doctor who specializes in cells or whatever you suggested. It was really interesting. She looked at him with a huge grin on her face as Miyazaki chimed in. Yeah, you're really perceptive when it's about quirks, aren't you? I did think that I wanted to do something like you just suggested, but if I really wanted to do that, then I would have gone into the IT department and not into support, but my passion is building things and trying things out, rather than specializing in IT. Finally having snapped out of it and getting used to the fact that up until now they didn't think it was creepy and even answered his questions and engaged into conversation with him and didn't just ignore him like his former classmates did, he went back to talking instead of sitting there awkwardly. Why yeah, you see, even before my diagnosis I was really interested in quirks and how they worked, so I really like picking them apart and analyzing them to their core, so yeah haha. Looking up at them and judging if he was okay to continue talking, he carried on. And I kind of always wanted to be a hero, and that dream didn't really die after the diagnosis. I just kept doing it, and now it's a good hobby of mine. I mean, my first notebook is written in crayon, I think. But now I don't want to be a hero anymore, but rather someone who helps people with my inventions. And if that doesn't work out, I'll just work as an analyst or a quirk counselor. Wow, you already know what you want to do with your life? I wish I was so resolute and able to plan that far ahead. Well, I'll definitely be the next head of Hatsume Support Industries. I'll take over my parents' enterprise and make everyone's lives easier with my babies. Hey, come to think of it, you have to work for me then, Midoriya? And just like that, their lunch continued with excited conversations drifting from quirks to support items to plants and then to the debate whether Endeavor was a good hero or not. They all agreed that he's overrated. He's not nice and causes way too much unnecessary damage to his surrounding areas and is a walking fire hazard. The bell rang and they went back inside for 5th and 6th period, being arts with Midnight and English with present Mike. Izuku almost couldn't keep still at the fact that he actually was being taught by pro heroes, and despite admiring them he still took his notes. After classes ended, he said goodbye to Hatsume and Miyazaki and went to Recovery Girl to let her look at his shoulder. It was a bit tender and it would definitely bruise, but other than that she dismissed him fairly quickly and sent him home with some gummies. Arriving at home he ate with his mother, told her everything about today, except for the explosion. She didn't need to know that, and after taking a shower he collapsed onto his bed and fell asleep, huge smile plastered on his face. Izuku still can't believe that he isn't being judged by his classmates at all. Like, he was full-on prepared to come home with bruises every day after they found out, but none of that happened. Instead, he was friends with Hatsume and Miyazaki, and after a while, the almost deathly pale guy, Nakamura, went over to them and kinda just went with the chaotic flow of the trio, and well, he guessed now they're a quartet? Well, Nakamura has a really great quirk. His appearance was also altered as his quirk came in, which is called lullaby. It basically lets him lull anything that he wants to sleep by making any kind of sound, be it humming or singing or even just talking. So of course Izuku didn't understand in the slightest why he didn't want to be a hero. So naturally he asked him. It was definitely a new experience in his life to be allowed to just ask questions and not having to fear the possible consequences, but after the first week his other 8 classmates had made it very clear that they wouldn't discriminate, belittle, or bully him, like, ever. Maybe not so. Funnily enough, most of them had been victims of bullying like him as well, or they had a friend who got bullied. Ueno, the girl with the long fingers, which is her quirk, pickpocketing, was picked on because she has a villain's quirk, and to find out that such a, what Class 1H called ray of sunshine rolled into a cinnamon roll, was bullied at both physical and verbal levels, well, let's just say she was pissed. But why wouldn't you want to be a hero? Like, you could easily defuse a hostage situation just by talking, or just make any villains you encounter fall asleep before you even fight them. Izuku practically whined. Well, I have always admired heroes, obviously, who doesn't, but I could never see myself doing their work. I did think about going underground, but after I was robbed in an alleyway when I was in first year middle school and an underground hero came to my rescue, and she beat the robber down brutally, I was kind of traumatized at the level of force one would have to use against another person, and from that moment on, I knew I wasn't cut out for it. So, I reset my goal and thought, hey, if I don't want to be a hero, let's just rethink my entire life and start from scratch. After I came home that day and I told my parents I didn't want to be a hero anymore, they supported me and looked into job options. Turns out I have a knack for building things, and after doing an internship for a week at a support company I knew what I wanted to do. Is that enough of an explanation to you, or do you want me to tell you my plans for if I fail in UA and can't go into support? Because if that happened, I would either become a yoga instructor with meditation and stuff, or I'd work in a mental hospital and help patients calm down and fall asleep. The greenette just wanted to throw in another question, but then the bell rang and my Jima-sensei walked in and they all hurried to their seats. Alright class, today will be a bit different than the last 2 weeks. Today in practicals, you won't be working on your projects. We'll look into the more analytical and intelligence specifying aspects of a supporter. And to see at what level you are, I have decided to make a pop quiz today. The teacher let a big stack of papers fall onto his table with a loud thud and a few students groaned in annoyance. This quiz will most likely take you the whole of the practicals to complete. You will start when first period starts, at 8:40, to be exact, and the time will end at lunch, at 12:30. So be ready by the end of homeroom, prepare something to drink, eat, whatever you need to be able to concentrate for so long, and make sure to have enough pencils and erasers, pens, sharpeners and so on. The usage of any kind of support item is not allowed, no laptops, phones, smartwatches, anything technological, and any attempt at cheating will leave you with a failed test and detention for a week. Most of the students were now looking at the man in complete shock and mine aside. I know that this seems a bit much for a pop quiz, and I know that pop quizzes are supposed to be short, but turns out that the principal was bored and put this test together to make you more aware that supporters don't just make items but also have to have analytical skills. What else the principal has in mind, I don't want to know, honestly, so start getting ready. You are going to need every bit of energy you have for that test because it's long. Go! Still in shock, and most were annoyed too, they got up and went to the vending machine they somehow convinced Power Loader to put into their class, and filling up water bottles, and in general getting ready for the test. Izuku thought that he was probably the only one to actually look forward to this test. Sure, it might be weird, but honestly, who wouldn't be excited to take a test the Nedzu put together for them? So when Majima-sensei wished them good luck, Izuku happily started to scribble away. The amount of pages was a bit overwhelming, but the test was supposed to last 4 periods, so that wasn't really surprising. What was surprising, however, was the contents of the test. The first 5 pages were filled with logical thinking riddles, and in general questions Izuku guessed a detective or something would have to think about. After that came about 10 pages of questions that required knowledge about the human body and how support items could either help or hurt it, as well as how one had to individualize support items to a specific quirk. Then, the next 8 pages or so were completely dedicated to what-if questions regarding anything that had to do with coding and programming, and at some point even hacking. Honestly, it was a good thing that Izuku was such a nerd and knew how to hack and program and code, so these questions, while challenging, weren't really that brain-wrecking. And then came the Greenette's favorite part of the test, where he is sure he had almost everything right, the 7 pages of quirk analysis. He was absolutely ecstatic to dive into what seemed to actually be official copies from actual people as well as short descriptions and problems of the quirks, and Izuku ran out of writing space 6 times at those pages. After the 3rd time of asking Power Loader for an additional paper, the teacher just put a stack of paper on his desk with a curious smirk and went back to the front. The freckled boy's face was strawberry red, but he quickly pulled himself together, and even after double-checking everything on the test, he stood up almost 15 minutes before time was up, collected his phone and his headphones, and listened to present Mick's radio show from yesterday evening. The bell signaling lunch rang and the remaining students let out a collective groan, and Power Loader collected the test packets and told them to go and eat something and get back to strength by eating Lunch Rush's lunch. Now Hatsume, Miyazaki, Nakamura, Ueno and Izuku were sitting in the cafeteria since it was raining outside, and they discussed the test together. Seriously, does Nedzu want our brains to explode because of overuse? Like, seriously? This was ridiculous. I didn't even get to the last 4 pages. What the hell was that? Ueno declared in a devastated tone in between bites of her yakitori. That test was 30 pages long and it lasted fucking 4 periods. How long are the finals gonna be, 6 lessons or more? An upperclassman, a girl that looked like a mouse, walked by and grimaced. Oh, did Nedzu put together a pop quiz for you? Oof, my sympathies, his tests are absolute nightmares. But aren't you first years? Normally he only gives those to 2nd and 3rd years. She trailed off and Hatsume answered. Yeah, we're first years, we're class 1H of the support course. But honestly, the worst part was that I couldn't build any babies today. I'm so gonna have to stay late today and make up for the lost time. The upperclassmen looked a bit taken aback by that statement, but the first years at the table were already used to Hatsume's unique phrasing, so they moved on. Izuku was really surprised to hear that Noon had been able to finish the test at all, and just as he wanted to say something about question number 134, Miyazaki turned to him. Hey Midoriya, didn't you hand in your test before time was up? The whole table fell silent and now all eyes were on him. And didn't you also ask Majima-sensei for extra sheets of paper a few times? Did you actually manage to finish everything and write more, or did my ears deceive me? Izuku blushed hard and stammered something impossible to understand out, and Nakamura reminded him to take a deep breath. Then, slowly he started over. Well, you see, I have always been good at analyzing things, and I guess it was really lucky for me that the last part was quirk analysis, since I have been doing exactly that since I was a toddler, so... He awkwardly trailed off, and Hatsume went to add something to the conversation as suddenly a deafening alarm sounded. Security breach level 3, students evacuate. And then the whole cafeteria broke into a panic. Izuku's breath hitched too, and after taking a deep breath again, he shouted over the alarm, guys. Let's wait a few moments to let all the others evacuate and then we'll go. We don't want to get crushed in that crowd in the hallway, okay? Miyazaki was the one to respond to that, hands covering their ears. Okay, let's do that. After about 2 minutes most of the students were out and the group of 5 also made their way outside. After finding the remaining members of Class 1H, they went to find Power Loader, and after double-checking that everyone was there they were allowed to go back to class. Everybody wondered what had happened, and Yamada-sensei was so nice to tell them that the media somehow had managed to get inside the UA barrier and that set the alarm off. What he didn't tell the students though was the fact that a part of the barrier had been destroyed and they didn't know how or by who. It took almost half of the English lesson for everyone to calm down completely from the shock, and only in maths with ectoplasm everyone was forced to partially forget about the incident and focus on solving the calculations. After that they were allowed to go home. Izuku went home just like every day before that, and after the nerve-wracking events of today, he promptly fell asleep after collapsing face first into his bed. All right, my dear teachers of UA, we shall now officially begin this emergency meeting. Nezu chirped from his place on the table. All of you that were present yesterday are already aware of the Level 3 security breach that was caused by the media yesterday, and for those who weren't yet aware of this, now you are. First of all, I wanted to thank the teachers that were on scene as fast as a lightning bolt and got the situation under control as efficiently as expected. He looked each teacher in the room in the eye, and whatever it was that he wanted to find, apparently he did because he carried on. I also wanted to thank Cementos for his quick thinking and building an impromptu new barrier to ensure the safety of the students. Now, what will happen in the next few days? Here is what we'll do. The rat pulled out a remote from Kami knows where and put on a slideshow. First, we will focus on checking over UA's barrier as well as the whole of the security system. I will hire some extra people I can trust so that not everything regarding this issue has to be solely on Powerloader's plate. Maijima nodded in appreciation. Second, it has come to my attention that the majority of the student body, with exception of the hero course, has panicked because they weren't prepared for how to react in this kind of situation. I have already reviewed the recordings of the cafeteria and some of the students caught my eye. To be precise, a table of first-year support students. Nezu pushed a button on his remote and a cutout video popped up. The sound was turned down, but one could still easily hear the sirens and screams. The camera zoomed into one table, and sure enough, the 5 students seated looked very much like first years. An androgynous-looking student clutched their ears because of the volume, and next to them sat a boy with a head full of unruly green curls. He also had his hands pressed against his ears, and they watched as he took a deep breath. Then it looked like he shouted, but the sound quality was very bad and it came out muffled, but everyone could understand what he said. Guys, let's wait a few moments to let all the others evacuate and then we'll go. We don't want to get crushed in that crowd in the hallway, okay? The person next to him shouted back an okay, and after waiting for around 2 minutes most of the other students had filtered out and the group of 5 quickly went and looked for any remaining students in the cafeteria, and after finding one other first-year boy and successfully coaxing him out of under a table, they went to evacuate themselves while repeating reassuring words to the boy, who was obviously panicking. The fact that they were patient and kept each other calm in a new situation like this made me very happy. They only have been at our school for 2 weeks and they aren't even in the heroics course. Do any of you know their names? Especially the green-haired one, he seemed to take the lead instinctively. Powerloader spoke up. These students are all a part of Class 1H, my homeroom class. The green-haired one is Izuku Midoriya, the first quirkless student at our school. The student next to him, the elf-looking one, is Haru Miyazaki, and their quirk is detection. Then there's the pink-haired one, Mei Hatsume, quirk zoom, the light blue-haired one is Soma Ueno, quirk pickpocketing, and the one that looks like he crawled out of a grave is Sana Nakamura, quirk lullaby. Also Nezu, sir? He looked the principal in the eyes. I actually wanted to talk to you about Izuku Midoriya. Remember the analysis test you put together for the entire support course? Not just the first years but all of the 3 grades? Well, I made them complete it yesterday before that whole fiasco with the media happened, and you told me that none of the first and second year students should be able to complete that test in only 4 hours, but Midoriya here gave me his test packet 15 minutes earlier, even after requesting extra pages so many times that I just dropped a pack of sheets on his desk. In the remaining 15 minutes I flew over his answers, and on first glance most of them looked correct. After that I figured out why he needed so many extra sheets, and well, let's just say, it looks like he has a knack for quirk analysis. I wanted to give you his test to look it over, because I know you wanted to get something out of this. Powerloader finished his almost speech and raised an eyebrow, almost daring the rat to disagree. Nezu's grin only grew wider with each sentence the man spoke, and at the end it looked almost feral and the other teachers all leaned back a bit. Thank you, Power loader, I will gladly look into it. Now, back to the topic. I will come into your homeroom tomorrow, my Jima-san, and visit those students of yours to praise them a bit. Now let's close that group of students for now and focus on another trio of first years, but this time I'm pretty sure they're from the heroics course. He pulled up another video, but this time from the crowd in the hall. The camera zoomed in and focused on 3 students. One with short, navy blue hair, a shorter girl that resembled a frog, and a girl with a brown bob cut. Unfortunately, the panic was too loud this time to make out anything, and they watched as the frog girl said something to the male. The boy then shouted something to the brown-haired girl and she touched him, making him float. He then proceeded to crash into the emergency sign labeling the exit and informed all of the other students that it's just the media. It took a few seconds, and as the crowd silenced itself, the microphones managed to make out sound again. There is no need to panic. It is just the media outside. You can see them through the windows. Now let us act like proper UA students and evacuate in an orderly fashion. The crowd complied and the mass panic calmed down. Then the video ended. This time Eraserhead spoke up. That were students from my homeroom class, 1A of the heroics course. The boy is Tenya Ida, Quirk Engine. The frog girl is Tsuyu Azui, Quirk Frog, and the brown-haired girl is Uraraka Ochako, Quirk Zero Gravity. If I'm honest, I'm glad that they took my lessons to heart and didn't panic, because if they did I would have expelled them. The last part was mumbled into his scarf and was unheard by the other teachers. Right? Then I will come to your homeroom tomorrow too, to praise them a bit. Now, to prevent such a mass panic from happening again, I would like to introduce the idea of doing a test run or a simulation of every single alarm level in the next 2 days. Does anybody else have anything to say? He looked around again, and the only one to move was Power Loader, pushing the test packet of Midoriya towards him with no words. He took it and put it Kami knows where. Alright, if that was all then please get back to what you were doing before this meeting. The rat chirped happily as if they didn't just have an emergency meeting after an invasion and the destruction of the school barrier. Taking a shortcut through his beloved vents, the rat returned to his office and flicked on the lights. The sun was already setting, but Power Loader intrigued his interest in this particular test written by none other than the first quirkless student ever admitted to UA. Normally, Power Loader would not bother asking him to overlook a student's test, if not to find out if they had cheated or not. No, this time he thought he would be interested in whatever was written on these sheets of paper. Of paper which originated from the thought of bringing awareness to the students that analysts are in high demand right now. With a certain type of anticipation after looking forward to reading through them, he opened the first page. Then the second, third, 10th, up until to the 22nd page. Well, what have we here? Nedza didn't find even one mistake, except for one miscalculation after typing in a wrong number into the calculator, but everything else was spot on. Up until now nobody in his entirety of 10 years as a principal had managed to get a higher score, and he hasn't even looked at the analysis part yet. A wide, feral grin spread across his face, and he grabbed his cup of tea with his free paw and sipped a bit out of it. Now let's see what you know about quirk analysis. Midoriya Izuku? A mad cackle echoed through the halls of UA, and the remaining people in the teacher's lounge stopped what they were doing, froze, and looked at each other with horrified faces. They all knew that the cackle belonged to Nedzu, and Nedzu cackling either meant he found something interesting or he plotted world domination. All of them agreed though. They hoped it was the second option because the first one could potentially bring the end of the world with it. 1 week before the security breach. Alright class, listen up. Maijima-sensei got the attention from every student in the room. Today is the day of your first project assigned by me. Most of you probably don't know, but heroes aren't the only ones that get to wear costumes. Supporters usually have them too, mostly to hide their identity from villains because good supporters are highly sought after by villains. The occasions can differ significantly for supporters to wear our costumes because of the different kinds of us. Some only build items and sell them, only making general ones and no individual ones. Then there's the private ones with individual items. Those two usually don't need gears because they never leave their workspace. But then, there's supporters that work on the scene and or behind the scene. Support analysts, for example, are highly sought after and most have some kind of intelligence quirk. However, Those people are constantly endangered to be kidnapped and forced to work for villains. A prime example for this is Professor David Shield. Even though he was only a supporter that built and sold individualized items, he was abducted around 10 years ago and the villains tried to force him to work for them, but he had refused. All Might saved him about 2 days later, but he is the most known case of kidnapping a supporter. Depending on what kind of supporter you want to be when you graduate, I want you to have your gear finished by the end of the week. If you want the design to be aesthetically pleasing and you don't know how to do that, there's always the possibility to ask the design department for help. Now, what I want to have on your costume is the following. Something to cover your faces with. It can be a helmet, a mask, a visor, anything that makes you anonymous. How you design it is completely up to you. Just so you know how to work with them if necessary, I want you to build in weapons as well. Mainly for self-defense, but if you want to be a supporter OS on scene, I want you to add some kind of short-range and long-range weapon. It should be practical and please don't go nude, at least not until you're of age. You have until the end of the week to finish everything. Your last chance would theoretically be Monday practicals for the final touches. If you have any questions, ask ahead. Everybody was staring at him for a few seconds and then Takeda, the redhead space buns guy, asked what Hatsume probably considered the real question. Do we have any limitations for the weapons or do we have to resort to weapons that don't require a license? Majima-sensei snorted. Of course you'd want to know that. Alright, so for some reason the school board saw absolutely no problem with giving children weapons, and I know it sounds illegal, but as long as everything's self-built, you have absolutely no limitations except for illegal weapons such as a nuclear bomb for example. Was that all? This time, Yuki, the snow-themed twin, spoke up. Will the final product be graded and do we need to provide our blueprints? Yes, it will be graded and added into your final grade. I will need the latest blueprints Oswell. And with that, everyone got to work. It was a good thing that Izuku already knew this. Because if he was to be a supporter and if he wanted to branch off into the analysis part, he would definitely have to be on scene to give real-time analysis. That was the hidden reason why he had begged his mother to enroll him into martial arts classes and parkour. He wanted to be as ready as he could be, and not having any kind of fighting basics was basically a death sentence on the field. So, he started sketching out his outfit. He had already put many hours into how it should function and what weapons he would incorporate. The only part he wasn't sure about yet was the aesthetics. He knew the basics of what he wanted it to look like, but the details? He would go to the design department as soon as possible, probably in second period after he finished his sketches. Sometimes he absolutely regretted having free internet access at a really young age. But this time, even if it was an R16 series, he watched the Prequark series, Attack on Titan, and he would definitely reimagine the omnidirectional mobility gear, for short, ODM gear. He would skip out on the swords because those are impractical, and he would attach the grappling hooks on his hips for optimal movement. The mechanism for the coordination he would build into the mask he would be wearing and connecting it with sensors to his brainwaves. The sensors would read only the brainwaves that had to do with using the hooks, and they would obey at will. That would be for mobility. For long range, he'd definitely need a gun. Good thing he already had a self-built one at home, currently still with harmless ammunition, but he'd switch that out soon enough. If he'd ever need to restrain someone, then he'd add a replica of Eraserhead's capture weapon, but not around his neck, but wrapped around his arms and with incorporated DNA from him so nobody could use it except for him. For short range, he'd definitely use a few kinds of knives. He learned how to use them and throw them at the martial arts training, so he was already accustomed with the safety and everything. He'd strap them onto his thigh, at least the big ones, and the small ones he'd hide all over his costume, but they'd still easily be extractable and reachable. Then of course, his bow staff. He'd tinkered with that for a whole of 4 months at home before he finally took it with him to train at the dojo. He managed to save up enough money to buy a big amount of tungsten, the sturdiest metal on the planet, and built it out of that. He also put a taser into both ends, as well as extendable blades mimicking a scythe on both sides. The blades of that weren't that big, but definitely enough to stab someone or slice someone open. And the best thing was that he managed to make it foldable without giving it any weak spots. He also absolutely couldn't forget about some shuriken and some kunai too for good measure. The shoes he would have to make himself, but that won't be a problem after talking to the design department. He'd definitely reinforce the toes though and make them waterproof and electricity absorbing so he won't shock himself or be electrocuted. And maybe hide some blades in the soles. He'd also add some gloves with a texture that wouldn't let him slip to death if he ever had to hold on to something, and it definitely would help him climb things. And he'd add some smoke bombs and a few hand grenades. He's probably a bit overdoing it, isn't he? Oh well, better safe than sorry. He is quirkless after all, and with all those weapons he'll just even the fighting conditions. That 1 week they got to work for was stressful to say the least. Hatsume and Izuku worked together on their costumes, and both of them went to the designers together for help. Turns out that Power Loader Sensei already warned them that some of his students might come to them, and they had met up with them on the same day they got the assignment, Monday. The Pinkette and Greenette went there after roughly sketching out their ideas and put down as many notes as possible, and two of the designers snatched both of them into different directions and started working on everything. The costumes for the support course were kind of like extra credit points for their classes, so everybody was left with some kind of win. Class 1H was so pressured with the time that all of them unintentionally met on Tuesday morning 2 hours before school started in the studios and only looked at each other once before returning to what they were doing, all of them respectively with headphones and music on because apparently none of them were fans of mornings nor early risers. They even ended up staying behind after classes, and the last to go home would always be the same three: Izuku, Hatsume, and Miyazaki. The latest Izuku stayed, simply because he lost track of time, was on Thursday evening, when Snipe Sensei closed the school for the day at 9 p.m. Every day he'd come home covered in grime and oil and who knows what else, and after getting especially dirty on Tuesday his mom got him about 10 pairs of overalls in the style of the UA uniform. He tried it out the next day and asking Maijima Sensei if they were allowed to wear this. Since it was in the style of UA's normal uniform, the teacher surprisingly agreed. He said that since he was Izuku's homeroom teacher it was his decision what was okay for them to wear and what not, and he didn't see a problem with anything really as long as it was school-themed, not a safety hazard because of too many accessories or overly sexy or revealing. He didn't even see a problem with hoodies and t-shirts, so it would be fine, especially since the support course was infamous for not caring about the dress code. It was kind of a tradition anyways. The support items he didn't manage to finish by Friday, he took back home and finished them there. The last details such as embroideries and aesthetic stuff he finished with his partner from design. The next day on Tuesday was the security breach and the analysis test, and the reason they weren't given any more time to make their costumes was because they apparently would need it the next day, Wednesday. On Wednesday, at the start of homeroom. Alright class, I looked over all your costumes yesterday while you were working on your tests and I approve of all of them. You will need them today, since we will go off campus. A few whispers broke out but were soon silenced as Power Loader Sensei continued talking. We will do a joint class training with Class 1A of the Heroics course. We will meet up with them outside and take the buses to the USJ, the unforeseen simulation joint. However, since it would be unfair to Class 1B, only half of this class will be going with 1A, the other with 1B. I asked Aizawa and Ken which one of their classes were harder to look after, so we chose which students of this class would go with which hero class. Group 1 consists of Yuki, Sora, Takeda, Hatsume, and Midoriya. You will go today afternoon. Group 2 consists of Ueno, Miyazaki, Nakamura, and Kaneko. You will go tomorrow afternoon. I know that we normally have practicals in the morning and theoretical subjects in the afternoon, but today and tomorrow we will switch that. You will also receive earpieces that connect you to your group mates and to the teachers. Now go to your theoretical classes. Anyone who has questions can come to me during 5-minute break. The supporter hopefuls began walking towards their next class, and all of them chatted excitedly with each other. Somehow over the last week Izuku and Hatsume became really close, maybe because both of them were a tad bit insane when it came to building things and trying things out even if it meant blowing up the lab more times than they can count, or because Hatsume was Izuku's first ever real friend since Bakugo. I'm so excited. I can't wait to try out all of my babies at the USJ. I really look forward to it. What about you, Midoriya? Izuku snorted. You know, every time we walk in the halls and somebody passes us, you always talk about making babies, and honestly, their reactions are always a hilarious sight to see. But yeah, To get back to your question, I also really look forward to it. Who knows, maybe they want to test us in how good we can coordinate things, or analyze things on the spot and in real time, and maybe they'll even incorporate some kind of villain ambush or something that could happen in the real world too. And Izuku happily rambled on and on and on, and Hatsume would often throw in some of her own ideas and theories. The time simply couldn't go by any slower, and finally they were sent to put on their gears for the first time and went out to wait by the buses. Izuku was so very happy and content and in his own little bubble with Hatsume that he completely forgot that Bakugo was in Class 1A, and he almost had a heart attack as he heard the loud blonde's shouts from the distance. The pinkette in front of him stared at him looking very confused as he hastily pulled on his mask and hid his face. After noticing the utterly bewildered madwoman looking at him like he was a donkey, he shouted an answer to her unspoken question. The loud blonde that's coming here right now is Bakugo. He's the one I told you about from middle school, the one that left that one handprint on my shoulder. She looked at him with wide eyes and after a moment nodded. Okay, thanks for telling me. I'll try to keep you away from him as much as possible, and I'll tell the others not to call you by your name. Wait, what should we call you then? Izuku didn't need to think long about that. He had known his code name since he found out that not only heroes had code names, but supporters too. Call me Mist, it's short for Mist, because you can't do anything against me, and for Mysterious because nobody will ever think that I'm quirkless. Hatsume grinned at that. Great name, Mist, you go get on the bus. Maijima-sensei gave the okay just now and I'll go and tell the others. Thanks, Hatsume. Oh please, I think we know each other long enough now, call me May. And I'll call you by your first name too, whenever Angry Pomeranian isn't near. Oh sure, thanks Hatsume. Sure thing, Mist. Now go. Okay. And with that, Izuku made his way to the bus and only pulled off his mask after making sure Bakugo couldn't see him through the windows. During the drive, one of the twins asked him why they should hide his identity from Bakugo, and since Izuku trusted his classmates now, he told them that the blonde didn't treat him kindly in middle school and that if he would see the greenette he would most likely explode in his face, quite literally. Just as he had finished with a sugar-coated version of his life with Bakugo in a nutshell, they all understood and agreed to call him Mist under the condition that he'd help them come up with code names. Before getting out of the bus, all of them pulled on their masks and went over to 13 and waited for Class 1A's bus to arrive. The group of 5 made their way to 13, and even though the rescue hero's face couldn't be seen, one could easily see the surprised reaction after seeing a bunch of teenagers all approach them with masks and hoods hiding their identities. Good afternoon. You must be Class 1H, the support corps students, is that correct? Miyazaki was the one to answer them. Yes, that is correct. I do have a question though. Go ahead, I'm sure I can help you. What will we be doing here? Like, I know that supporters are also part of the front lines and stuff, but still, we most of the time leave the rescue and fighting work to people with an actual hero license, so what will we be doing today? That was a question Izuku had been asking himself too, so he was pretty grateful that Miyazaki said something. They definitely were the most organized and reliable person he knew in this class. That is a good question. In situations like natural disasters, where many people need to be rescued without having to fight villains, it is important for heroes to work together. A key part of that is that the kind of supporters that also work on scene help navigate and organize the heroes to prevent unnecessary confusion and waste of time and resources. Most of the time the support items they carry with them help too. That means that we will train skills such as working in a team, and trusting one another without actually knowing anybody personally. As for why you were asked to bring, or in your case make, weapons for yourself, out in the real world it is very common for villains to attack before, during, or after a disaster happened, and the first thing they do 99% of the time, they will try to incapacitate the organizing, supporting people, you supporters, so to say. That is why us teachers will try to ambush you to see at what level of self-defense and situational awareness you have. Don't worry, we don't expect you to fight to the death against us. You are only first years after all, and you don't even focus on combat training. That summed up about any questions that would have been asked, and the group of 5 were handed their earpieces and were given a quick instruction on how to use them. Around 10 minutes later, the bus with Class 1A finally rounded the corner and the hero hopefuls trickled out and flocked around 13. The support students all hung a bit to the side, as instructed by their teacher to interact with them as little as possible. Power Loader Sensei said goodbye to them and went on his way to check the barrier on this side of campus, and 13 began their speech about how quirks can be powerful and heroic, but can also easily kill somebody. Finally they went inside, and Aizawa Sensei, the hobo-looking man, but kind of familiar-looking Izuku thought, turned to their little group and instructed them to walk down to the central plaza and make themselves familiar with everything. Meanwhile, Izuku was practically vibrating with how excited he was for this training exercise and looked around everything, frantically taking in every single detail he could. That is also why he was the first one to notice the swirling dark purple spot down in the middle of the plaza, and it seemed to grow in size too. Suddenly he got a gut feeling that this was important, and without looking at Aizawa, fixating his gaze to the swirl, he spoke up. Aizawa-sensei? Is that supposed to be there, or? The man followed his gaze and took in a sharp breath. Pulling down his yellow goggles and gripping his scarf, he replied, voice controlled, after a few people stepped through the purple mist. No, that's not supposed to be there, those are villains. 13. Protect the students. By now, all the remaining students stared down into the plaza, which was quickly filling to the brim with villains, with fearful faces. 13 started to usher them back towards the entrance as suddenly the purple mist formed around them, and before any or them could do anything, they were encased into it, and the next thing Izuku knew, he was falling. Darkness surrounded him in swirls and was disorienting Izuku. He didn't know what was going on, except for the fact that he was falling and it was getting hotter the longer he fell. Wait, hotter? He snapped open his eyes and looked down, and his eyes were assaulted by the brightness of a sea of flames about 50 meters beneath him. How the hell was he going to survive a fall from this height? But wait, he didn't reimagine the ODM gear from Attack on Titan for nothing and pulled an all-nighter testing it out in Gym Hada, only to now not use it. Still falling, he brought his hand to his head, pushing the button right above his ear, and thanked Kami for his brains and that he tested it out before, because if he hadn't, he'd most likely have fried his brain a few times with the brain sensors, not to forget about the countless hours of fine-tuning that damn thing. A bit roughly, but still safely, he commanded the grappling hooks on his hips to retract, embed themselves in the nearest, highest building, and as soon as he was fixed, he retracted the sturdy, but flexible and light tungsten ropes and swung himself down, only to almost be hit by a streak of lightning. Izuku let out a startled yelp and put his arms in front of his body, ready for an attack, which never came. However, a surprised shout could be heard. Mist? What are you doing here? The fires and the smoke was obscuring his vision, but he could make out a small form with a head that looked like clouds. Sora? Oh my Kami, are you okay? The realization hit him like a truck. That wasn't a villain, that was his classmate. He quickly ran over to her and hurriedly looked her over. Yeah, it's me, but what is going on? Suddenly everything went black, and then I was dumped onto the street, and then two villains came and I panicked and I hit them with a lightning and knocked them out, and I was so scared, and then you came here flying and I didn't recognize you because of the smoke, and I almost electrocuted you too, and dash. Whoa, Sora, calm down. You're not alone anymore, everything's fine. We got each other's back, okay? The greenette tried to soothe her as much as possible, and he tried to reassure her both through verbal and body language, but he didn't know if he succeeded or not because both of them were wearing masks. Okay, yeah, you're right. Sora's breathing was now a bit calmer than it was before, and Izuku looked around. They were in the fire zone, that much was obvious, judging by the never-ending fires. He also knows that they definitely still are in the USJ, because there was the dome, towering around 500 meters above them. Suddenly he remembered. Hey, does your earpiece work? Her straightening posture indicated that she now too remembered the existence of comms and quickly put a hand up to her ear, mimicking Izuku. The telltale sound of static flooded their ears, and both of them straightened even more than before. Taking a deep breath, Izuku spoke, although with a shivering voice because of all the fear he was currently feeling. Miss to everybody, I repeat, miss to everybody, me and Sora are in the fire zone, no injuries. What are your situations? Not even 2 seconds later, which felt way too long for both the teens, the line connected. 13 speaking, I am at the entrance with 4 students, up until now no injuries, over. The line disconnected and the next one formed. Eraserhead speaking, fighting in the main plaza dash, a grunt and some distant battle noises could be heard, a few scrapes but otherwise fine. Another set of noises could be heard. Missed, if you run into your classmates, stick together and hide, avoid combat with the villains. Now a crash could be heard. If you don't have any hiding possibilities, try and make your way around to the entrance, stay hidden. Over. Izuku responded immediately, understood. Just as he wanted to tell Sora they needed to go, another signal came through. Hatsume speaking, I'm at the flood zone with Great Boy and Frog Girl. I incapacitated the villains in the water with one of my babies, currently searching for a route to get to the entrance, over. Even though she sounded chipper, everyone listening could hear the seriousness in her voice. Izuku was just relieved that she was okay. He genuinely hoped it would stay that way. Getting that it wouldn't be smart to talk right now because villains could still be around and waiting to ambush them, so he pointed into the direction he thought the entrance was and Sora nodded. She formed a cloud and sat on it, and Izuku readied his ODM gear, as he heard another voice through the comms. Takeda speaking, I'm in the ruin zone with Rock and Boom Boy. The two incapacitated the villains quickly, but Boom Boy has a pretty deep slash wound on the outer side of his thigh. I was hit in the head with a baseball bat and the Rock is bleeding from his arms. First aid has been done, heading to the entrance now, over. Just as Izuku wanted to take off, Sora placed a hand on his shoulder. I think it would be better to stay in the shadows. Stealth our way through? I don't make any noise with my cloud, but I can't support more weight than myself yet. But you have shock-absorbing shoes, right? They should muffle your footsteps. The teenager could slap himself. Why hadn't he thought about that? His gear was still far from perfect, and one of the aspects he still had to look into was the noise they made. Agreeing with the cloud girl, he retracted it and took out his bow staff. Better be safe than sorry, right? She nodded in acknowledgement and started floating deeper into the side alleys, Izuku on her heels running as silently as he could. Before each corner they stopped, carefully peeked around, and if they deemed it safe they went on their way. But he still felt like he was missing something. That's it. Skidding to a stop, he looked around. Sora turned around too and motioned with her hands something resembling a "what's wrong," and she flew over to him. In a hushed voice he told her to follow him into a building. In hindsight, that was pretty stupid considering that building was on fire, and after checking if nobody could hear them, he spoke into the comms again. Miss Tayuki, I repeat, Miss Tayuki, can you hear me? Sora tilted her head and he was sure she wondered why he would need her twin right now. The line connected again. Yuki speaking, currently at the entrance with 13 and 3 other students. They are fighting the portal man right now. I'm staying hidden, what's wrong? The boy breathed a sigh of relief and answered. Yuki, have you tried connecting to the outside world? I know you have a hacking device incorporated into your costume's mask. I had to first search for a safe place to hide, but right now I'm trying to get through, but I'll need at least 2 more minutes. Understood, keep at it. We have to get help as soon as possible, you're doing great. He figured a few encouraging words couldn't hurt and he was relieved that she had already thought about it. But it does prove difficult. I'm pretty sure a quirk is jamming the signals. Keep at it, I know you can do it. Oh, I have an idea. Mr. 13, Mr. 13, is there a control room somewhere in the USJ? Over. 13's voice came through now. They were definitely out of breath by now. 13 speaking, yes, on side to the east of the fire zone, over. Dang it, that's too far for Yuki. Change of plan, we'll try to get there and send a signal from there. We're only a block away from it. Izuku frowned. He had hoped it was near the entrance, but turns out it was at the opposite end right next to them. They wouldn't have to go far though, and he was pretty confident in his hacking skills. The rescue hero spoke up again. Fine, but stay as hidden as possible, avoid fighting at all costs. Over. Understood. He disconnected the line again and looked over to Sora, who nodded determined. They went out again and were on their way, but suddenly they heard shouting around the next corner. They looked at each other and preened around and witnessed a fight going on. It seemed to be all of them, 5 he counted, against 1. Oh shit, that's a student. Before he could really think about it, he whipped out his bow staff again, charged it and slammed it into one of the villain's neck from behind, leaving her spasming for a few seconds and then collapse onto the floor. Well, now he's done it. All of them, including the student who had a tail, now looked at him, and the student was the first to regain his composure and swiftly knocked out the nearest villain, a man whose head was that of a goose, with a move from Taekwondo, customized for his tail. Izuku would know about it. He has been going to Taekwondo classes as well as others since he was like 5. 2 of the 3 remaining criminals now came rushing towards him, and he pulled himself together again. He dodged the first one by jumping up into the air and landed on top of them. He charged his staff and rammed it into their back. While doing that, he used the staff, pushed himself further up into the air and slammed his feet into the second villain's face. He heard a sickening crunching sound and both villains were incapacitated. Or so he thought. The one he kicked got up again at an incredible speed while Izuku got off the other and charged for him, but this time they drew a weapon, a metal bat his mind supplied, and were lunging it to probably smash his skull in. Years of the torment and hits and kicks done by Bakugo and his martial arts training paid off in that moment, having honed his reflexes significantly. He ducked right under the swing and activated the blades on the ends of his weapon. Spinning it, he managed to slash them in the side of their stomach, and they took a few steps back. He knew that that was the moment he was waiting for, grabbed his taser because it was stronger than the one in his staff, and lunged forward without hesitating. Their eyes went wide and then squeezed shut as soon as Izuku managed to tase them in the neck, and a gut-wrenching scream escaped their mouth before going limp and collapsing. Redirecting his gaze, he looked around, searching for the last villain, only to find her incapacitated laying a bit next to the tail boy, who was panting violently but staring at him, mouth hanging open. It seemed like he remembered that they were still potentially in danger and quickly composed himself. Hi. Are you from the support course? Checking again that the enemy was in fact out cold, he answered. Yeah, we are. I'm Mist, and the girl behind the corner is Sora. We're on our way to the control room to try and send out an SOS signal. Wanna come with us? He sized Izuku up with a calculating look and nodded. I'm Ojiro. Let's go. Sora came out from behind the corner on her cloud and waved. Hey, do you think we should inform the teachers that he's with us now? The greenette shrugged. I guess it wouldn't hurt? I'll tell them. Bringing his hand to his earpiece again, he connected the line. Mist to the teachers. Update to our situation. We found Ojiro, I repeat, we found Ojiro and assisted him in a fight against 5 villains. All of them are incapacitated. No injuries acquired. We're now heading to the control room, over. 13 speaking, understood. Be careful and stick to each other, over. He turned into the direction where the exit should be, and sure enough, there it was, only around 100 meters away from them. He started running and looked back, checking if the other 2 were following, and then picked up his speed. They didn't have much time left. Who knows how everyone was doing right now, especially Eraserhead. He was alone, up against dozens of villains, and he normally doesn't fight big groups but is in fact an ambush hero. Ripping those thoughts out of his brain, they ran through the exit, headed east, and sure enough there was the control room. It didn't look like it was guarded or being used, so as soon as he stopped in front of the door he opened it. Just like he thought nobody was inside. He turned around to the other 2, both looking at him. Ojiro was the first one to ask a question. What are we supposed to do now? Like, I know we should probably go to the entrance and avoid fighting, but if you want to try to get out a signal then we can't really leave you here. Right? Would you mind and try to hide around here and stand guard? I'll have to concentrate on hacking and won't notice things around me most likely, which is pretty dangerous. Sure. I'll climb up into the tree right above the control room. And with that he flung himself up into the tree like a monkey, and hid himself in between the leaves. The greenette redirected his attention to Sora now. I have a question. Can you make a cloud and disappear into it? You could hover in the sky and fit in with the other steam clouds and warn us from above if somebody's coming. He really hoped she could do that. It would make things 1,000 times easier. Luckily she perked up and nodded enthusiastically, and Izuku watched with awe as she produced a big cloud around her and easily floated up, fitting right in with the other clouds. He went in and closed the door. Quickly he sat down and got to work. He was trying to break through for a whole 30 seconds max as suddenly Yuki's voice filtered through the earpiece. Yuki to Mist, I'm through. But I can't send out anything. I'll redirect it to you because I'm running out of time. Please tell me you're already in the control room. She pleaded. The distress was clearly noticeable in her voice. Miss Yuki, I'm in the control room. Connect me and I'll try to send it out, over? He was sweating by now, everything was depending on whether he could pull this off or not. He anxiously waited for the connection to light up on the screens and it must have been around 10 seconds or so. That felt like an eternity, and as soon as he was connected he assaulted the keyboard with his rapid typing. His heart hammered in his chest, and after another painfully long moment he managed to get out 4 messages. The villains. Over 100. Suddenly Yuki shrieked in his earpiece. He instantly knew something was wrong. She whisper-shouted in horror. 13 is down, I repeat, 13 is down, the villain is gone now too, but 13 is down and injured badly. He cussed off the alphabet at that and quickly sent another message. Hero 13 incapacitated, only each still fighting. Double-checking that the messages actually got through and were read, he responded. Miss Yuki, understood. SOS signal is out. You have medical supplies in your costume, right? Go and help 13 as much as you can and try to hide all the students in them. If nothing works, use your quirk to obscure the enemy's vision. Checking the now again intact cameras, he found that the bushes were a pretty decent hiding spot. Go hide in the bushes on your right side, nobody should notice you there. Understood, came the instant reply, and he could hear shuffling on the other side before the line went dead again. He pulled up the live feeds of the other zones in the plaza and decided that if he was here then he should at least try and help as much as he can. He was disappointed that the teachers didn't have the chance to distribute comms to the 1A students, so he could only watch over the ones where no 1H student was. Looking into the flood zone, he found Hatsume crouching in the bushes with a little purple boy and a green girl. The boy and the girl were both wearing a multitude of Hatsume's items. She probably gave them to them. They looked to have everything under control, so he switched to the ruin zone, where he knew Takeda was. When he saw Bakugo, he frowned a bit. Even though he couldn't hear what they're talking about, he knew that Bakugo was shouting at the redheads, not caring that they could be discovered. He jumped from camera to camera, checking the whole zone for any villains, and was relieved to find none that were in any condition to fight. Most of the unconscious ones had bad burn marks on them, and a few were bloody. He knew that Takeda had used his quirk to incapacitate some of them too, due to a good bunch of them being restrained with bended chunks of metal wrapped around them. He started the line again. Mr. Takeda, can you hear me? Clear as day, what is it? The ruin zone is completely clear of any villains. Stay hidden and make your way to the entrance. Also, if Bakugo doesn't want to listen, tell him Eraserhead told you. He knew that the explosive blonde wouldn't want to take orders, but maybe if it comes from his teacher he'll listen? Understood, thanks. He watched as Takeda told them, and judging by Bakugo's reaction, he didn't hesitate to drop Eraser's name, and they made their way to the entrance. He saw 3 other students coming from the mountain zone and watched as Takeda's group and them joined together. Figuring they'd be okay, he switched to the landslide zone. He couldn't do much for them, but it looked like they had everything under control, judging by their teamwork and the number of villains laying on the ground. The last zone he checked was the downpour zone, and his eyes widened comically. The first thing he saw was a giant glacier encasing about 30 villains, and on the foot of it stood 3 students, one half encased in ice, the other looked a bit shy, and the third he almost missed because he perfectly fit in with the dark environment. Yeah, they'd be okay. It was time to call back Sora and Ojiro and tell them to get back to the entrance with him. Deciding it would be smart to inform their remaining teacher of the situation, he, yet again, spoke into the comms. Miss to Eraserhead, update to our situation. Fire zone is clear, no students there anymore. Same goes for the ruin dash, mountain and flood zone. Downpour zone's villains are incapacitated, students unharmed. Students with 13 unharmed, 13 is incapacitated. The only students still fighting are in the landslide zone, 3 people. Injured are Rock Boy, Takeda, Bakugo and 13. I'm not sure about the rest. We'll be making our way to the entrance now, too. Over. Eraserhead speaking, understood, B-dash, a grunt could be heard, careful. As he stepped out, Sora was already back down, having listened to the conversations. Ojiro probably noticed and plopped back down. You got through? he asked, hope lacing his voice. The support student smiled, only to realize he still had his mask on and instead straightened his back. Yeah, now we just need to head to the entrance undetected. That could prove to be difficult though, there's not much hiding space. Anyways, let's go. The other two nodded. Ojiro had a serious expression on his face and Sora's body was as tense as ever. As fast but still as cautiously as possible they went their way. They passed both the mountain and the landslide zone, and all three of them almost jumped out of their skin as they rounded a corner and nearly collided with 6 other students. They quickly introduced themselves as Yaoyorozu, Jiro, Kaminari, Sato, Siro, and Ishido. Kaminari was in kind of a dumb state, and Yaoyorozu was weak because of quirk exhaustion and Jiro was bleeding out of her ears. Izuku informed Eraser again of the development. All he got in response was a grunt on the other side. It was painfully obvious that he was nearing his limit. Just as he finished his update, Hatsume's voice cut through the earpieces. Hatsume speaking, me and Great Boy and Frog Girl have met half and half, Shy Boy, and Edgelord and are now on our way to the entrance. Frog Girl has a sprained shoulder and half has hypothermia, but other than that we're fine. Over. The further they went the more villains they had to evade and nobody of their group of 9 made a sound as they got near the plaza. They listened as a man in a black hoodie and black sweatpants with hands all over his body monologued about killing All Might with something he called Nomu, and that only he could control it, but none of them could actually see the thing because they were cowering behind a row of bushes and a boulder. He gushed about how it has regeneration, super speed and super strength on par with All Might's power and went on and on about it. All of them discreetly looked for some kind of hidden path around, but there seemed to be none other than open space and they couldn't really just waltz through like a bunch of models. So he took a deep breath, unsheathed one of his knives, and not listening to his companions he crawled through the bushes to the boulder and peeked over it. He took in a sharp breath and his eyes widened. The plaza's sides were full with villains knocked unconscious. If he had to guess, there were around 50 on the floor and 20 were still fighting against Eraser, who was significantly slower than when Izuku last saw him. He watched with awe as he wrapped 2 villains with his scarf and let them collide into each other, knocking both of them out, and not even a second later he was taking down another one. He forced himself to look away and his gaze swept all over the place, zeroing in on, is that Hatsume? She was hidden pretty well in the bushes and next to her were 5 other students he's never seen before. He narrowed his eyes and tried to see what she was doing. It looked like she was distributing her support items to the students and saying something to them. He just hopes she won't do anything stupid. He went down behind the boulder again and took out his gun. A plan formed in his head. Was it risky? Was it stupid and dangerous? Was it based on luck? Also yes. Will he do it despite the odds? Focus. The hand villain was monologuing again about how hero society is broken and that Eraser is really cool, and Izuku wasn't even listening to it anymore. He loaded his gun as quietly as he could. He prayed to every single deity out there that his plan would work and got ready. He waited for the perfect moment. He dashed in a mad sprint from the boulder onto plain view and skidded to a stop 10 meters away from the boulder behind the fountain. The students that were hiding with him all stared at him in horror and shock and waved at him to stop it and get back, but it was too late. He couldn't. Not without being seen. Honestly, it was a wonder how he remained unseen from any villain. All of them were focused on Eraser and the Handman. Hiding behind the water falling down from the fountain, but still being able to see and aim perfectly fine at the leader. He put his finger on the trigger. His hands were shaking like leaves and he had to hold his breath to be able to aim correctly. This needed to work on the first try or else he'd be as good as dead. Oh, who is he kidding? He will be dead as soon as all of this is over. Taking a new breath, he focused on the leader, aimed, and shot. The gunshot echoed through the plaza. Everything stopped in its tracks. The mist man stilled. The villain stilled. Eraser jumped back to get some distance, panting heavily. The leader held his arm, swayed and collapsed to the floor. Izuku aimed again and shot what he guessed was the Nomu, because that thing didn't even look human and judging by the leader's description it had multiple quirks and therefore couldn't be human. He hit the Nomu's brain right in between its eyes. Blood streamed down its face and the eyes rolled back. Just like its master, it collapsed to the floor too and was now laying in its own growing puddle of blood. All of this happened in less than 5 seconds. After the 5 seconds, the mist man regained his composure and quickly encased the hand man into the dark purple mist he was made of, and then he was gone, leaving the remaining less than 10 villains behind. After another tense moment of silence where nobody dared to move, one of the left-behind criminals cried out something about Shigaraki being a traitor, and the rest began to panic after being left alone, not wanting to be arrested. Eraserhead took advantage of their riled-up feelings and swiftly incapacitated the rest of them. Then suddenly, a wave of wind almost swept Class 1A's teacher from his feet, and the booming voice of All Might echoed through the dome. "I am here." Maybe because it was because of all the adrenaline he was running on. Maybe it was because he was in shock. But he still did what he did at that moment. He stood up, walked up next to the now on the floor sitting Eraser and yelled, "Fucking finally! Took you long enough?" He was just so goddamn angry all of a sudden, and he didn't know why. In fact, he was fuming. His fists were clenched, and he was satisfied in seeing All Might flinch back visibly while a bunch of other teachers came in and made their way down the stairs. Izuku was absolutely mad right now. He glared up at All Might, who came down to them and walked over to Eraserhead. He growled, in a hushed tone that sent shivers and goosebumps across the blonde man's back, "I thought you were supposed to be a heroics teacher, All Might? Or were you? How come you were absent at your own class you were responsible for teaching?" The symbol of peace visibly gulped and raised his hand placantly, trying to calm down the furious teen. Now, young man, there's no need to get angry. I'm here now, am I not? Everything will be okay." That just served to enrage Izuku even further. "Oh, yeah, sure, everything's okay now, after we fought for our lives for over half an hour. Yeah, everything's good. This was no biggie," he sarcastically snapped back. All Might shrank in on himself even more and threw a pleading look down at Aizawa, who, to Izuku's delight, looked away and pretended he wasn't even here. It was well known in the student body that 1A's homeroom teacher and the symbol of peace weren't on good terms at all, and that was confirmed right before the Greenette's eyes. All Might wanted to say something again, but Izuku wasn't finished yet. Also, how come that more heroic students have been more injured than us support students? Like, we haven't even had one period of self-defense classes yet, and somehow none of us except for one is injured? However, a whole of 8 students of the hero course have injuries, and that only includes the students I managed to find and get information on. How come that us support course students took the lead in a life or death situation that we weren't trained for in the slightest, but hero students were? How come, All Might, that the villains only attacked us because they knew you taught this class today in the USJ? You know, their plan was to actually kill you with that big-ass Nomu thing that's lying in its own puddle of blood now because I shot it before it could do any damage? Izuku was panting now, and the majority of the teachers and students were now staring in shock, forming an uneven ring around Aizawa, All Might, and him. Izuku ripped off his mask and hood, revealing his unruly green curls, freckles, and eyes that were spilling tears down his cheeks. "How come that you were the one to tell me I couldn't be a hero just because I am quirkless? You didn't even ask me what I was capable of. You didn't even ask to find out that I have been attending 3 kinds of martial arts classes since I was 5, parkour since I was in middle school? It didn't interest you in the slightest why I wanted to be a hero. You didn't care about my feelings at all, and you left me, without medical care, mere minutes after I almost died because of that sludge villain, on a rooftop after stomping on my dreams like everybody else." He was full on sobbing now, his breath came in quick and uneven. "Do you know what could have happened? Do you know what I could have done to myself after you told me to be realistic?" Everybody who wasn't being tended to by the paramedics was staring at both of them in shock and horror. All Might had a look of recognition and memory in his eyes, as well as growing dread and guilt. Aizawa was staring in shock, anger, and something else at All Might. Some of the students and teachers looked disgusted by All Might's acts, others, namely the support course students, looked like they were 1 second before exploding with rage. Hatsume was the first one to make a move. She went over to the Greenette and embraced him in a big bear hug. And that was the final straw. Izuku broke down, sobbing, and buried his head into the Pinkette's shoulder. His legs gave out and both of them went to the ground. She never let go even once and kept murmuring calming words to him. She even went through what seemed like countless breathing exercises with him to get his breathing back to normal because at this rate, he was going to hyperventilate. Midnight was the next one to move. She draped a shock blanket over the both of them and ushered All Might away from the scene. Everybody was silently grateful for that. The rest of the day went by in bits and pieces, most of which were a blur for the freckled boy. One thing he knew for sure though, Hatsume was always by his side, holding him tight and never let go. Not even when he was picked up by Power Loader Sensei and carried to the ambulance. She always held some kind of physical contact with him, and be it only linking their pinkies together. He faintly noticed being taken out of the ambulance and carried somewhere again, then it smelled like disinfectants and then everything went black. This day was supposed to be a normal one like every other day in his life. But no, it just had to be a fucking catastrophe with a cherry on top. Not only did he have to check the whole UA barrier for flaws, which proved to be his least important thought that day, but he wasn't there when his students, that are not even heroic students, got attacked by over 100 villains and he only found out after everything went to shit. He only found out after being called to the USJ over the announcement Principal Nedzu made over the property-wide scattered speakers. He had to barge in through the doors of the USJ and take in the scene. Well over 70 villains were laying incapacitated all over the plaza, one bleeding heavily from his head. His eyes darted from one moving thing to the other, looking if there were any more villains that needed to be apprehended, and he was more than just relieved that there was no immediate danger at that moment. He could have almost cried to not see any dead students. He had to witness his students break down with all might of all people right before his eyes and had to carry him to the ambulance in his arms. The boy was shaking like a leaf while sobbing, fading in and out of consciousness because of the shock and the adrenaline that was wearing off. It had hurt him especially bad having to let him go because he wasn't allowed in the ambulance. Hatsume though, she straight up refused to leave his side, and after bickering back and forth with the paramedics, he just told them to let her go with them. And thank Kami that Takeda's injury was only a minor concussion. Thank Kami that the boy was smart enough to reinforce the helmet he was wearing, because judging by that thing's condition, his head would have been reduced to a few splatters of blood and a smashed-in skull on the floor after taking that force. And don't even get him started on the growing rage directed at the symbol of peace. He watched in complete horror while Midoriya, the maybe a little overly motivated, sunshine rolled into a cinnamon roll, nicest, kindest, most respecting and hardworking student he's ever had, broke down and revealed such abominable past experiences with the number one hero. He had to listen to his student basically telling the world that he could have committed suicide because of All Might, after he stomped on his dreams right after a traumatizing villain attack where he almost died. And the thing is, he didn't even have to check if Midoriya was lying or not, because the amount of raw emotion his whole body, words and voice displayed were proof enough. Not even Nedzu was having his usual smile plastered on his face, only indicating that not even he could find any lies in the teenager's words. So now, after arresting all the 120 villains, making sure that all of his students were safe and being tended to, he was sitting in Recovery Girl's infirmary next to the bed the unconscious Midoriya was currently lying on with an 4 drip in his arm, waiting for him to wake up. The youthful heroine told him he'd wake up any time now, and just as he wanted to make a new plan on how to verbally scar All Might for the rest of his life, his student let out a breath and slowly opened his eyes. Majima waited for another few moments to let his student take in his surroundings, noticing the alarmed and tense expression he was wearing on his face, and then spoke up. "Hey, Midoriya." The teen rolled his head towards him and a look of recognition waved over his face, and he visibly relaxed into his pillows. With a croaky voice he responded, "Hello, Majima-sensei. Where are we?" Smiling a hopefully reassuring smile he answered, "We're at UA, in Recovery Girl's infirmary. You passed out because of the shock." The freckled boy, and oh Kami he never realized how many there actually were, furrowed his eyebrows. Why was I in dashed? His eyes widened instantly and his breath hitched significantly. His gaze darted around the room so fast Majima almost couldn't make out the green of his eyes anymore, and the teen was now sitting up straight. "Oh my Kami, are the others okay? Where are they? Please tell me nobody's hurt too badly." Maijima had expected that kind of reaction and already took Midoriya's shoulders and pushed him back down. Don't worry about them, they're fine. About where they are right now, we escorted the ones without injuries home and Takeda was discharged about an hour ago. He only has a slight concussion. Other than that, every single one of Class 1H is fine. Everything's okay now. Take a deep breath for me, please. Yeah, just like that, you're doing great. He guided him through the breathing exercise for about 2 minutes until the kid calmed down and leaned back into his stool. You okay now? You want to talk about what happened? The child, because that's what he is, a child, looked at him with a bewildered look on his face. Why was he so confused? He only asked him if he wanted to talk about it. What's so confusing about that? Before he could ask himself any more questions, though, a whisper shut up his thoughts abruptly. Why are you asking? I mean, you're a teacher? And oh, he was going to commit a homicide for this kid, wasn't he? Why wouldn't I want to know if you're okay and what happened? And what does me being a teacher have to do with anything? The questions were asked because of genuine curiosity and concern. However, he was not prepared for his student's answer. No teacher has ever asked me if I was okay, much less asked me for my opinion on something or my side of a story. So why do you care? That was said in such a broken, confused and vulnerable voice that his heart clenched. Midoriya, you're my student. It's my job to make sure you're okay and I literally get paid to interact with you. Also, I don't know what kind of teachers you've had up until now, but even if I wasn't a teacher, I can still show basic human decency and ask you if you're okay after a traumatizing event you went through. So, are you okay? Midoriya still looked confused as he spoke, and his eyes displayed a certain kind of wariness he didn't want to see in any person he knew. Yeah, I think I'm okay. A bit shocked still, I guess, but other than that I'm fine. Okay, that's good. Now what happened when I was gone? His eyes clouded with something and he looked away, out the window. At first everything was normal. 13 was explaining everything and I wasn't really listening because they already explained everything to us support course students because we were there before the heroics course. So I was looking around the USJ and then I saw a black purplish swirl forming at the center of the plaza and told Aizawa sensei about it while villains were stepping out of it. I guess the Mistman's quirk is some kind of teleportation or warp quirk. And then everything went to hell. He jumped down into battle and we couldn't do much because suddenly the mist villain appeared in front of us students and 13 and then everything went black. I opened my eyes again as I felt the air whoosh past me and get hotter and found out that I was falling from a few hundred meters into the fire zone. I was able to get down safely with my ODM gear and then Sora almost electrocuted me because she didn't recognize me at first because of the smoke. After I calmed her down because she was panicking, I remembered the comms 13 gave us 1H students and tried if we were connected or not. Thankfully we were and I informed everyone with a comm where Sora and I were and what our situation was. 13 ordered us to stay hidden and try to go to the entrance and avoid combat as much as possible, so we did. We crept our way through the fire zone and then stumbled upon Ojiro. 5 villains were ganging up on him and I jumped in to help him. The teachers was listening intently and he couldn't help it and Amos did a double take, interrupting him. You jumped in? Yeah. The first one was surprised and didn't see me coming, so I quickly tasked him with my bow staff. I kind of served as a distraction then and Ojiro managed to knock another one out right after. Then the other 3 were charging at me and I knocked out another one by jumping up and ramming my bow staff into his neck, electrocuting them too, and I kicked another one in the face. That one, however, only stumbled back a bit and drew a baseball bat out and got ready to hit me in the head, but I managed to dodge, extract the blades on the ends of my staff and cut him across his torso. He still wasn't incapacitated, so I used his off-balance state, took out my pocket taser because it's stronger than the one in the staff and tasered him until he was out cold. I turned around and saw that the last villain was also knocked out and Ojiro was staring at me for some reason. We teamed up, informed the teachers that we found Ojiro, and after contacting Yuki to ask if she was hacking through the jamming, we went to the control room. Ojiro and Sora stood guard and I managed to get out 4 messages, and when Yuki informed us that 13 was down, I sent out that information too. Then I figured I couldn't really help much, so I checked all of the zones and informed every zone with a 1H student in it how to get to the entrance, and after that we got to the entrance ourselves. Maijima had to interrupt him again. So you not only were dropped to fall to your death and somehow survived that, you ran into villains, engaged in combat, actually succeeded and more or less took on the role of an informer and organizer. Damn it. So what happened after? The student seemed to ignore his wonder for the moment and carried on. Well, then we almost had a heart attack because as we turned around a corner we ran into 6 students from 1A. I think their names were Yaoyorozu, Jiro, Kaminari, Sato, Siro, and Ishido. We teamed up, informed Aizawa, and after evading as many villains as we could we found ourselves hiding behind bushes and a boulder on the side of the plaza. We searched for another way around but there was none, so we stayed hidden and silent. Then we heard the leader, Shigaraki or whatever his name was, brag about how he'll kill All Might with something he called Nomu, and then I did something I now realize was pretty stupid and reckless, but oh well. Higuri lifted an eyebrow at that. And what did you do? Well, I remembered that I had a gun and loaded it with the bullets I made, you know, the ones with the sedatives in them that immediately work. Anyways, after I did that I waited for the perfect moment and bolted about 10 meters over the plaza, and quickly hid behind the fountain. Honestly, it's a wonder how I wasn't seen, but let's not dwell on that now. I took aim at the leader and shot him in the arm, because he bragged about how he was the only one to be able to control that thing, and then I shot the what I thought was the Nomu in the brain, because Shigaraki was gushing about how that thing had super regeneration abilities, super speed, strength rivaling All Might's, and I wanted to take that thing out before it could do any damage. I figured that thing had to have some kind of weak point, and after I saw the exposed brain, which was pretty gross, BTW, I shot it there and it went down. The mist man encased Shigaraki into the purple mist, and then they were gone, leaving that Nomu and the other villains behind. And then, just as Eraser knocked out the last villain, All Might arrived, and you know the rest after that. The student finished and Power Loader was at a loss for words. His student, a 15-year-old, first-year support student successfully engaged in combat against actual villains, took down the most dangerous ones even though he's never been taught how to do that, assessed the situation almost like a pro hero, made the villains retreat and got out of all of this unscathed. What the actual fuck? And the most important part is, he was right. With every single thing he said. The Nomo has already been looked over and the abilities the villain listed off were all true. Who knows what that thing could have done? This could have ended in even more of a tragedy than it already was, and Midoriya potentially saved all of them. Holy shit. A knock signaled somebody wanting to enter, and he was snapped out of his staring at his student as Aizawa walked in. Good afternoon, Midoriya, Power Loader. The man said and pulled another chair up to the bed, on the opposite side of where Maijima was seated. How are you doing? I'm doing fine, but what about you, Aizawa-sensei? You must be exhausted. Of course the Greenette would be concerned about the man's well-being, that was so in character. Maijima noticed that Aizawa found it amusing too, because after years of working with that man and even being tolerated by him, he could tell the very subtle signs. I'm fine, if a bit tired, thanks for the concern. I won't ask you what happened because I heard from outside the door in the waiting area. I wanted to give you a little heads up that you will be asked a few questions by a detective, and I wanted to ask when you'd be ready to do that. Oh, well, I guess I could do it now? I mean, I'm not hurt and I already told Majima-sensei about it, so it won't hurt to tell the story again. Okay, then I'll call him in. Hey Tsukachi. You can come in, he wants to give his statement now. The door opened again and a plain-looking man in a beige coat and a hat came in, holding a recorder under his arm. Hello Midoriya. My name is Tsukachi Naomasa and I'm the detective running this case. I will be recording this conversation, so can you tell me your full name, age and quirk and what happened? Midoriya's expression darkened a bit, but he did as he was told nonetheless. My name is Midoriya Izuku. I'm 15 years old and I'm quirkless. The detective looked up at that but didn't say anything. Aizawa looked surprised too, but thankfully no pity or anything that could upset the boy were visible on both the men's faces. After that the Greenette retold his side of the story and Tsukachi occasionally threw in some questions. Yet again, Power Loader was impressed by the teenagers sitting in front of him. The student stayed calm, gave honest to Kami answers, and clarified anything without hesitation. If he hadn't known better, he would have thought he already went through giving statements about something before. The questioning was almost at an end when Tsukachi spoke up again. If you're wondering if you'll get into trouble for shooting two villains, you won't have to worry since it was in a life or death situation and you had to defend yourself and others. Nothing will go into your record and no charges will be made against you. Thank you for all your honesty and cooperation, I really appreciate it. Have a restful evening, Midoriya. And with that he stood up and made room for Recovery Girl, who came to take out the now empty 4 drip. Now, dearie, since the drip is empty now and you aren't as pale as you were after you were brought here, you can go home. Goodbye. And with that they were left to their own devices. Majima and Aizawa gave him some privacy so he could change back into his uniform. When he was finished he pulled back the curtain and started to walk towards the door, only to be stopped by Majima. He asked, "And where do you think you're going?" The teen stopped in his tracks and looked at him. Home." Higuri cocked an eyebrow. "And how would you go about that?" The kid looked visibly confused now. "By train." He sighed. "Midoriya, every single student has been escorted home today. That means that I will drive you home myself too. Now come on, let's go to my car." "Oh, okay, I guess. Thanks for having me." The greenette looked way too tired to resist, and they went to the car in silence. Aizawa followed them and got into his own car, driving off before them. The car ride itself was quiet, and every time Majima glanced to the passenger's seat his lips perked up into a smile. Midoriya was dead asleep. He pulled into the driveway of the apartment complex and woke up his student, who blinked back his sleep and sluggishly got out of the car. The sun had set a few minutes ago and the stress of the day caught up with the teen. When he passed the kid on to his mother, he finally found out where he got the endless crying from, and then he drove home himself and didn't even bother to take a shower, let alone eat something, and just collapsed onto his bed and fell asleep. This day had been nerve-wracking and he wasn't even the one to be attacked. The last thought before blissful sleep washed over the excavation hero was that he'd organize one mandatory session with Hound Dog for his students. Cammy knew they needed it. The next day at school was weird and exhausting. Turns out that when classes 1H and 1A were attacked at the USJ, the rest of the school was put under lockdown, but the students weren't given any explanation as to why. And that leads to the situation at hand. Izuku walked into the classroom and was almost suffocated from the onslaught of questions thrown his way. As soon as Ueno, Nakamura, Kaneko and Miyazaki got sight of him, they were already crowding him and asking him a million questions in the span of 5 seconds. The freckled boy had known that this would happen. Majima-sensei had warned him yesterday that word had gotten out pretty fast and that the remaining class 1H wanted to know everything, but he had refused to tell them anything because it was not his right to tell them. Honestly, Izuku's opinion about his homeroom teacher was going up every day he saw him. The man looked at him like he looked at his classmates, and didn't care that he was quirkless. That was a very big green flag. Then, yesterday in the infirmary, he asked him if he was okay and what his side of the story was, and he even believed him. That had never happened in all of his life. So, Izuku decided that maybe, to a certain degree, Majima-sensei could be trusted. Not blindly trusted, he was still a teacher after all, but he could trust him at least a little bit. But right now he kind of wished the teacher had explained the situation to his classmates because he absolutely hated being bombarded with so many questions at once and they were way too close. Like, way into his personal space, and he didn't know how to tell them to back off without hurting their feelings. Every time he took a step back they took one forward, he took one to the side, they took one to the same side. It was overwhelming and he could feel his breathing start to pick up pace. People crowding him had never ended well. In middle school he would undoubtedly been beat up by the end of it. He would be lying in the back alleyway behind his school and bruises would be forming on his back, arms, stomach, literally everywhere where bruises could be hidden with clothes easily. Realistically he knew that he was in UA right now and that his classmates were worried about him, but he didn't see their faces at the moment. Nakamura's face morphed into the on of Bakuga's lackeys, and the next thing Izuku knew was that somebody grabbed his shoulder and pulled him backwards, and the gears in the greenette's head turned at light speed, and he was going to be beat up now. And how would he explain new bruises to his mother again, and why was this happening again, and why couldn't he breathe? And suddenly he was being... Arms embraced him, one was rubbing circles on his back, simultaneously pressing him into the person's chest, and the other was carding through his hair and held his head against the side of their neck. The greenette froze. Was he being hugged? The person was turning both of them a bit sideways, away from the students, and Izuku felt the person say something, judging by the vibrations he could feel in the person's chest, but he couldn't make out any words because his heartbeat was echoing in his ears and he still couldn't breathe for some reason, and now he was in somebody's arms, and what were they saying? He couldn't hear their voice, only feel the vibration in their chest, and what if that was a new trick to beat him up? What if the person was holding him so the others had better access to his back? But why was the person rubbing circles between his shoulder blades and carding through his curls so gently? And why was he not scared of the person? What was the reason? His arms were moving without thought, and he clutched the fabric of their shirt in the back tightly. He still couldn't breathe, and he tried to suck in some oxygen, but it didn't work, and he tried again, and he didn't even notice that the person had sat down onto a chair. He didn't notice being pulled into the person's lap, pressed against their upper body, legs dangling on both sides of their body. He didn't notice how quiet it had gotten in the room, nor the guilty-looking faces his classmates were making. The hand on his back was continuously rubbing circles, and the hand in his curls also never stopped the movement. The vibrations in the person's chest also never seemed to go away. He could feel their heart beat at a steady pace, and theirs and his own clashed in two very different rhythms. The person's was slow, steady, and calm. His own was wild, hitting against his ribs. His whole body was trembling and shaking at every attempt of sucking in a breath. He needed to take a breath, but it wasn't working. The ringing in his ears got louder and louder, and he still couldn't breathe. Suddenly, he felt something tapping against the back of his hand. At first he couldn't place what it was, but soon he felt a rhythm being repeated. For some reason, it felt oddly grounding, and he tried to match his attempts at breathing with each tap. The person rubbing his back was still doing so and also matched the rhythm now, making it a bit easier for Izuku to follow. He focused all his attention on the taps. He tried to ignore the ringing in his ears and his heart pounding in his head. Slowly, ever so slowly, he managed to get in a breath. And then another one. And another one. He started to feel the person speaking again, and sometimes he even heard something, but he still couldn't make anything out of it. But the vibrations in their chest were calming too, so he leaned in further. The arms around him tightened ever so slightly, and the circles continued on his back. The tapping never stopped, and Izuku could finally breathe again. The ringing in his ears got quieter and quieter, and his heart gradually slowed down. He could still hear it in his head, but it wasn't as consuming anymore as it had been before. Finally he could make out some of the words that were being said to him, but they didn't really form any sentences. He relaxed his hands on the person's back a bit, getting the feeling of his hands back and realizing they were hurting with how hard he was grabbing the fabric. His head was still buried in the person's neck, and they were now rocking back and forth, further grounding Izuku, calming him. Slowly, the words formed sentences, and the boy could finally understand them. "Shoo, you're okay, Midoriya. Everything's okay. You're safe. You're fine." Izuku hadn't realized just how much he needed to hear this and further melted into the embrace, momentarily not caring about who this was because he definitely didn't recognize the voice. Time passed both fast and slowly. He could have sat there for a few seconds, but also minutes. All he cared about was that he could finally breathe and Bakuga's lackeys weren't around and he was safe. Minoma Neito definitely hadn't expected his day to start out the way it did. At first everything was normal. He got up in the morning, got ready, got to school by bus, went into the school. Nothing was different. He put his school bag into his classroom, 1B, and the only thing that was different was that yesterday in heroics, he tore his costume and wanted to get it fixed by the support course. So he made his way to the support course and somehow ended up having a 1H student with the wildest and greenest curly hair he had ever seen in the middle of a bad panic attack on his lap. He figured he reacted that way, and with that way he means overly protective, because he himself suffers from panic attacks from time to time, and seeing 4 students bombarding him with questions about something and the boy trying to get away but couldn't, and then seeing the panicked green eyes blown wide and noticing his chest fall and rise at a rapid pace, he stopped thinking and did what his instincts told him to. He grabbed the boy as gently as possible at the shoulder, noticing the way he stiffened at the physical contact immediately, and pulled him to the side into a protective hug. The boy was about 10 centimeters shorter than he was, so he guessed about 160 centimeters, and after a few seconds of being frozen in place, he clumsily weaseled his arms around Neito's waist, and that had him a bit startled, since he never gets hugs returned, and clutched on tightly to his shirt. The boy was trembling violently and sucking in, or trying to suck in breaths but seemed to fail. At this rate, he was going to hyperventilate, so he started rubbing soothing circles on his back and carding through the tangled curls. After around 2 minutes, he stopped talking to the boy and addressed one of the classmates, asking for a chair to sit down on, and they hurriedly complied, very guilty looks on their faces. One even asked if he should use his quirk, one that lets someone fall asleep after hearing his voice, but for some reason, Neito declined. The greenette was still nowhere near out of the panic attack, but Neito knew that it wasn't a pleasant feeling falling asleep in the middle of one. At some point, several minutes later, Class 1H's homeroom teacher, Power Loader, came into the room and stopped in his tracks in the doorway, took in the scene and promptly asked the nearest student what had happened. While trying to calm the boy on his lap down, humming soothing words in his ear, he listened in on the explanation. Turns out the 4 that were bombarding him with questions disrespected his personal space and he started to panic. They think he had a flashback or something because suddenly he looked really out of it and looked at one of them, Nakamura, like he was someone else, and then Neito came and took the lead. Power Loader took a deep breath and promised that they would talk about that later. Everybody should leave the room now and wait outside in the hallway. Only after every student had left the room did Neito notice the principal and a homeless, tired-looking man with a bandage right under his eye on his cheek standing in the doorway as well. The man looked at Power Loader for a moment in the eyes, and it seemed like they had a conversation through their eyes and then both nodded. He made his way behind Neito, and he didn't know what he did, but after about 2 minutes, the greenette breathing was starting to calm down. Finally, Neito thought, the boy had been trembling and shaking at every attempt of drawing in a breath but couldn't. Turns out the hobo was Class 1A's homeroom teacher, Aizawa, and wanted to thank one half of Class 1H for being so brave yesterday when the villains attacked the USJ. Aizawa-sensei asked the blonde what happened, and after giving a short and to-the-point description, Neito went back to soothing Midoriya. He found out when the students of 1H were being questioned and that name fell more than once. After a solid 40 minutes after he arrived, Midoriya was sitting, almost laying on top of him, completely relaxed, and judging by the even breaths, the boy must have fallen asleep after all. Well, if that wasn't the worst panic attack Neito has ever seen, then he wasn't the only heir to his family's business. And he was, judging by the fact that he was a legacy child. Classes had started 15 minutes ago and Vlad King-sensei must be wondering where he was by now. Oh well, something happened and he got occupied. Power Loader Sensei then took Midoriya carefully from him and went to the back of the class, where, surprisingly, there was a couch. After putting the now sleeping teen onto the couch and noticing Neito's confused expression, the man simply shrugged. It's like this every year, almost like a tradition. Every single support class builds themselves a corner to relax, and honestly, it's a good idea. So I just let them do their thing. Aizawa-sensei hadn't said a thing at that, and almost seemed like he knew about that little detail already, and suddenly the principal spoke up from right next to the blonde, and he almost jumped out of his skin because at how near the stoat was. Well, then, I reckon that this is perhaps not the best time to be in here. Majima-san, I expect you to take care of Midoriya-kun, and educate the remaining class about personal boundaries. Aizawa-san, please go back to your class. I'm sure they look forward to seeing you instead of Yamada-san. He tends to be a bit more energetic than strictly necessary in the mornings, and from what I have gathered, most of your class definitely are not morning people. The stoat then turned to him. And what would your name be? Neito looked into those beady eyes and he couldn't help but realize that he was being spoken to by the arguably most intelligent creature on the planet and gulped. I'm Minoma Neito, Principal Nedzu, sir. The grin that was permanently settled on his face was a bit unnerving, but the blonde could manage. Ah, thank you, Minoma-kun, for taking lead of this little situation that we had here. You are in Class 1B, are you not? I'll write you a letter for Vlad King to excuse your absence from homeroom and a bit of first period. He went over to the teacher's desk, pulled out a note, scribbled something down and handed it to him. Now off you go. We don't want you to fall behind on your studies now, do we? Taking the dismissal, he quickly took the note and took his leave, and went back to his class. And if he had a wet stain on his shoulder, then it was nobody's business but his. Izuku woke up greatly disoriented and with a pounding headache. He opened his eyes, blinking away dried tears, and promptly sat up, not recognizing where he was. He startled at the voice next to him. "Hey, Midoriya. It's okay. You're safe." Whipping his head to the side, coming face to face with Midoriya-sensei, he let out a deep breath. He was at UA, on the couch of 1H. "It's okay." Looking the man into his eyes, seeing the well-hidden concern lingering in there, he remembered the panic attack. Well, bits and pieces of it really. It was a big mess. "Oh Cammy, that's embarrassing." Turning red like a strawberry, he sputtered out apology after apology, waving with his hands in front of him, until he was interrupted. Hey, no need to apologize. You aren't responsible for your classmates crowding you like that and making you uncomfortable to the point you obviously had a panic attack. With that said, I'm sorry you had to go through that. We would have had a period about personal space and boundaries anyway, and now it was just moved forward a few weeks, so please don't blame yourself for any of this. Knowing that there was no way to refuse, he nodded and went to stand up, only to sway and being stabilized by the arm and guided back down to the couch. Whoa, you okay there? I'll get you a glass of water. Oh no, it's fine, just a headache? Well, then even more of a reason to get you hydrated. Most headaches come from not drinking enough, and you technically have slept through the morning. The teen snapped his head into the direction of the clock on the wall. 12:50 a.m. 20 minutes into lunch. I slept through 4 periods? Izuku stated. You did. Majima replied, now with a glass of water in hand coming from Kami knows where. While pushing the glass into the greenette's hands, making sure he doesn't drop it and actually drink something, Sensei continued. That's also one of the reasons I'm still here. I wanted to make sure you were okay before I left you for the rest of the school day. Since today was a creative period where we worked on your individual projects you have to finish for the trimester, you don't have to catch up on any theoretical things. I just wanted to let you know. Now you said something about a headache? Would you like some painkillers? I may not be recovery girl, but I can give you some Tylenol. Izuku really didn't need much time to think about it, immediately gratefully accepting. After having swallowed the pill and feeling better after being in a sitting position for a while and having hydrated himself, he thanked the man again, just for good measure, and excused himself to go and eat some of Lunch Rush's lunch before lunch was over. Izuku, it's fine. Don't overthink it, you've got other things to worry about for now. Majima-sensei told you about the sports festival coming up and to think about what support items you want to take with you into the arena. Very much ignoring the sheer amount of embarrassment of having slept through the first 4 periods of the day and shoving those thoughts to the back of his head to worry about back at home in his bed, he lost himself into his musings about what weapons to build, to upgrade, run by power loader for confirmation, etc. So he definitely didn't notice the blonde-haired student coming his way and pausing momentarily, and then making his way over to him. The only thing that snaps him out of it was him almost running into the other. Well, not really almost, he actually did run into him. Great. Another embarrassing thing to die about in the safety of his bedroom in the evening. Oh, I am so sorry I was lost in thought and didn't pay attention to my surroundings. Both of them stepped back a bit, the taller teen still steadying Izuku at his shoulders. Oh, don't worry about it. Anyways, are you okay? You were kinda out of it this morning. He trailed off and retracted his hand to sheepishly rub his neck, averting his eyes. You know about that? Sorry, I'm fine now. How do you know about that? Did someone of his class tell somebody about that? Oh come on, I don't need rumors to spread about me again. Ah, that's because I was there when you had that nasty panic attack and I kinda, calmed you down? I suffer from those too and I knew what to do against them, so I figured I should help since I'm a future hero. Finally looking up into his eyes, which he noted were a silvery periwinkle color and the pupils themselves were white. Then the last part registered in his brain. You're a hero course student? Oh my Cammy, then you must be someone from 1B, right? Because I didn't see you at the USJ when the villains attacked? Is Vlad King a good teacher? He's a good hero from what I know about him. Ooh, are you even a first year? You're pretty tall. Like about 10 centimeters taller than me, but that's not really that hard to accomplish since I am below average speaking about height dash. Oh, I am so sorry about that. I was mumbling again, wasn't I? He slapped a hand over his mouth and looked at his shoes, ears glowing red in embarrassment. And the fact that he started laughing didn't make him feel any better either. Bah, yeah, you're right, I'm in 1B, the superior class to 1A, obviously. And yeah, Vlad-sensei is a pretty good teacher. I don't really know about how he does anything as a hero, but yeah. And about my height, I'm 170 centimeters tall. Were those all your questions, or did I miss something? Izuku was now staring at him with wide eyes and mouth agape. Holy hell, what's with the students at UA? How come most here understand my mumbling and even answer all my questions? What? I'll take that as a no then. I'm Minoma Neito. What's your name? Pulling himself out of his thoughts and shaking his head to clear his absolute clusterfuck of a brain, he replied, bowing slightly. I'm Midoriya Izuku. It's nice to officially meet you. Thanks for helping me today, and answering all of my nonsense questions. A hand grabbed his shoulder again, and Izuku finally remembered the feeling from the morning, recognizing it. Minoma's hand was very gentle. Like, he had bigger hands than Izuku, but they looked really soft and felt really soft too. He was pushed to stand straight again, and the blonde regarded him for a second, before sighing. Please, don't worry about it, Midoriya. Anybody would have done that. Anyways, you want to come eat lunch with me? I did some homework up until now and kinda avoided the long-ass line in front of lunch rush, but now it should be a bit shorter than half an hour ago. Smiling brightly, because could he have made a new friend right now? He nodded and they made their way to the cafeteria. The first 3 hallways they walked through were walked through in a kinda awkward silence, and after turning around another corner, Izuku finally burst with curiosity and asked the question that was lying on the tip of his tongue since they started walking. So what's your quirk? Minoma seemed to straighten up at that question and proudly began explaining it. Turns out his quirk was named Copy. He could copy 4 quirks of other people except for mutation types for up to 10 minutes at the moment, and was working on increasing both numbers. In order to acquire the quirks, he had to touch the person. It didn't matter if the contact was through clothes or not, as long as the clothes were skin tight. When they finally arrived in the cafeteria, Izuku desperately wished for one of his notebooks and internally cursed himself that he forgot to bring it with him today. He'd just have to remember it until he got home. Minoma had been right. After 30 minutes into lunch, the line was only 4 people long, and before he knew it, they were sitting in a secluded area in a corner of the cafeteria and munching on their food. Minoma had something French on his tray, which Izuku didn't really know what it was called, and he had a few onigiri, sushi, and mochi on his plate. So, Minoma, you excited for the sports festival? The ash-blonde teenager put down his fork and knife, now finished with his meal. Yeah, and Class 1B is so gonna be better than 1A. The 2 boys had only really known each other for a few minutes, and the green-haired one already knew that it was pointless to argue with the blonde one about who's superior and who's inferior, so he just went with it at this point. Raising an eyebrow, he replied, "Oh yeah? And what makes you think you'll win and not us from the support course? I mean, half of my class was there at the USJ too, and we got out of it with only one of us having a slight concussion. The rest of us was uninjured. Class 1A had multiple injuries though. So why do you think you're gonna beat us supporters?" Minoma froze at that. Wait, you were there too? The media only said that Class 1A was involved and that All Might came to the rescue. All Might even gave a public statement to the media yesterday afternoon and told us that he finished off the last villains. Now it was Izuku's turn to freeze. What? No, that's not right. One half of my class, namely Takeda, Yuki, Sora, Hatsume, and me, were there to learn how to support heroes on scene for evacuation purposes. We were there when the connection was cut, we were there when the villains appeared, and we fought for our lives side by side with one. Hell, I was the one that incapacitated the leader and got rid of the Nomu. All Might only appeared when Aizawa-sensei had taken out the remaining few villains. They stared at each other for a long moment. Holy shit, Midoriya, I believed All Might in that interview because, it's All Might, and didn't really second-guess him or look into it myself. Damn, you really did that, huh? All Might dug himself quite a deep hole, Izuku thought, and my respect for him is slowly but steadily decreasing by the day. Well, I guess Class 1H now has something to prove at the sports festival. Anyways, let's not talk about that right now. We still have 2 weeks to prepare, and I just found a pretty good motivation to show All Might just how strong the support course can really be. Across the table, Monoma shuddered slightly. How come the cinnamon rolls always have to be the scariest people but not even realize it? Shaking himself out of it, he instead focused on the first part of that sentence. So, you're a supporter, meaning that you are allowed to bring support items with you in the arena. You have any idea yet what you want to take with you? Monoma desperately hoped that that would throw Midoriya for a tangent like it did when he talked about quirks, and thankfully, it worked. Izuku, unaware of Monoma's intention, began enthusiastically rambling, and at some point he unconsciously curbed his speaking volume and muttered on and on under his breath. When he was finally finished, he sucked in a deep breath because, like always, he forgot to actually breathe between his sentences, and the blonde just fondly laughed about it, and Izuku was glad that the laughter wasn't intended to come off mean. They put their now empty trays into the collection point and made their way back to class. Monoma had heroics now with All Might, and he didn't really know how to feel about it and wanted to confront him about lying on TV, but Izuku was quick to tell him to continue as if he didn't know anything, since he said he had the beginnings of a plan in mind. That made frost creep up the taller teen's spine, and quickly he said goodbye to the shorter one and wished him fun in maths and science with ectoplasm. Quick information chapter. So, I just read through this story again and I found some holes in the context, so I'm gonna explain a few things. Izuku was diagnosed quirkless just like in canon and was down for a few weeks. He coped with analyzing quirks and heroes instead, but quickly realized he couldn't be a hero without one. So, he looked through the internet with Inko and found out that there was the option of becoming a quirk specialist or an analyst of some sorts. So he settled on that for a while. When he was 6 he came home with a few bruises, and Mama Inko was her usual overprotective self and signed him up for self-defense classes. He really liked them. At 7 he signed up for Kung Fu, karate, and after him not liking karate, he tried out Taekwondo, and up until today he still goes every weekend to Kung Fu and Taekwondo. He started parkour in middle school, helped a lot with running from bullies. At 8 he finds a new passion in building things, and gets his supplies from Dagoba Beach. At 9 he modified his phone, built himself earbuds, etc. If you haven't noticed yet, Izuku was greatly discriminated against all his life, especially badly in middle school, where none of his teachers ever gave him a better grade than average at most, even though he deserved the best. When Izuku shot Shigaraki, the villain didn't get a chance to see Izuku, but Kurogyari did. I didn't write that because Izuku didn't notice that he was seen, because he only cared that he still had to shoot the Nomu. I also wrote that chapter from Izuku's point of view, so there's that. But Kurogyari only saw his mask, which covered his whole face, and his telltale green hair was under his hood. The overall color of his outfit is camouflage-based, with some highlighted green embroidery. When Izuku verbally assaults All Might, Bakugo is being attended to by the medics because he has a nasty slash his thigh. That's why he doesn't lash out at Izuku after the greenette pulls off his mask and reveals himself. Since he isn't there to actually see him. Monoma did listen in to the explanation the 1H kids gave about why Izuku had a panic attack, but he was too focused on calming Izuku down to actually register the reason Aizawa was there, to praise the half of the class for being so brave at the USJ and to apologize. That's why he blindly believed All Might that only Class 1A was there, and nobody else. So yeah, I think that was it with that for now. Someone in the future I might draw Izuku's costume, but maybe I won't, because I still have a shitload of tests to do. Stay safe, my loves. Tamura Shigaraki woke up excruciatingly slowly, all for one thought to himself. When Kurogyari warped the both of them back to the bar, more specifically, directly in front of him to take a look at whatever it was that was in his successor's system that took him out of commission in mere moments, he was concerned. And after using one of his many quirks to identify just which drug that was and came up with 0 registered results, he was a bit interested. Kurogyari. The loyal warp villain was with him not a second later. Yes, sensei? Do you know who shot Tamura? His subordinate didn't hesitate in reply, honest and to the point, straight-out answers, in a neutral tone. I could not get a good look on the shooter, but I am fairly certain it must have been a student. They were wearing a full face mask, maybe with some technology incorporated. They also had a hood on, and the rest of the body was hidden behind the fountain. I could not make out their gender because of that. I am sorry for the lack of information. I was focusing on getting Tamura to safety. The man thoughtfully hummed in reply. It is quite all right, Kurogyri. You did as was expected of you. Either way, this will serve as an optimal lesson for Tamura. I will get rid of the what seems like sedatives in his system, but I will not heal the wound. He won't learn to be independent elsewhere. I expect you to take care of him. And with that, he cradled the light-haired man-child onto his lap, taking his head and pressing the forehead against his own, activating one of his quirks. Soon enough, a crystallized ball of the chemicals formed in his mouth, and when he was finished, he spat it out. As soon as the procedure was done, Kurogyri warped Tamura away, most likely to clean the remaining wound before the child woke up completely and threw an inevitable tantrum. All for one was honest, he loved his quirks, he really did, but he deeply regretted it, that he hadn't yet had the chance to take one that let him reverse things to their original state. He could have easily given the chemicals to the doctor to find out just what exactly it was, but in its crystallized form it was of no use. While watching Kurogyri treat Tamura, he thought about what to do when his successor woke up. Should he lecture him? Or let him figure it out on his own? So many possibilities to choose from. Well, might as well let him be. It would be entertaining to watch, the symbol of evil thought, as he watched Shigaraki wake up fully. Tamura woke up in his room. He blinked and sat up. Wait, why was he here? Wasn't he in the USJ before? Somebody shot him and then he collapsed. He faintly remembered Nomu being shot too. Good afternoon, Tamura Shigaraki, Kurogyri said next to him. To say that Tamura was irritated was an understatement. He was already subconsciously scratching at his neck and snarled at his servant. What the fuck happened, Kurogyri? One moment I was explaining how awesome Nomu was and that it would kill All Might, and the next second I'm shot and now I'm here. Tell me now. Kurogyri proceeded with what he was doing before, setting down a tray with a glass of water and painkillers next to it. It seems like one of the students got into a blind spot and managed to shoot you with a new type of sedatives that are not registered. As soon as I realized you were incapacitated and that Nomu was killed, I focused on getting you to Sensei. He detoxicated you and left me to care for your wounds. I believe Eraserhead dealt with the rest of the, as you call them, NPCs. And that was more than enough to disintegrate his blanket. He remembered Sensei's advice when he was angry. Take a deep breath and think rationally. So he did. Well, he tried. It took him almost 10 minutes, and finally feeling the shot wound, he took the painkillers and downed the glass of water with them. So some brat shot him and killed Nomu. The creature, that was supposed to kill All Might, was taken out by a mere student and a bullet. Admittedly, the Nomu did have one fatal flaw. Its exposed brain. But it wasn't possible to make it so the brain was not exposed. He couldn't do anything about it, he knew, because the doctor had said so. That means that it was the brat's fault. Yes, it's the brat's fault that he was so utterly humiliated. He had to talk to that brat. Maybe decay a hand or maybe even an arm. Grinning to himself, he told Kurogyri to go back to the bar and leave him alone for the rest of the day. He needed to blow off some steam with some video games. Yes, that brat will pay for daring to get in his way. Izuku was walking home from middle school just like any other day. Today, however, he decided to take the longer route through a tunnel. Honestly, worst decision in his life. Bakugo and his lackeys had been extra harsh today. Who told somebody to go and take a swan dive off the roof of the building just because they were born different? This time, though, was different than the rest. Why did that suggestion hurt more than it did any other day? Was it because it was the first time Bakugo had said it and not his lackeys? He didn't know what to feel about that. The Greenette had to admit, though, he had thought about it before. Back then he was shocked and disgusted at the thought. Now, though, he didn't really resent the idea anymore. Of course, he could never actually do it. He loved his mother too much for that, and he knew it would break her heart and shatter her beyond belief. So, he took one step at a time, dissociating while doing so, just like any other day. Deep inside, he knew how stupid it was to not pay attention to his surroundings as a quirkless person. He knew the statistics, he knew the communities. He was a part of one of those communities too, so he had been to a lot of funerals already. He even got his ear pierced, an insider of the community, a sign that he was a safe person, one of them. It was strictly forbidden for quirked individuals to know about it, and they were only allowed to be a part of the community if they went through tests of honesty, trials, and many more things that are a real hassle to do, so most of the quirked people who knew about the group, they ignored it. The earring itself was one that required 3 holes in the earlobe. It was a silver chain that looked like a snake, and the head looked like as if it was crawling up his ear. The tail wrapped around the 3 holes and the end of the tail hung at about a centimeter from his ear. Izuku really liked the jewel. It was a snake, and despite the knowledge about snakes, it was one of the most misunderstood animals in today's society. It was feared because it was different than normal animals like dogs, cats, horses, monkeys, and so on. When a human saw a snake, the first thing most of them do would be to try to get it as far away from them as possible or even kill them. The snake symbolized the quirkless people. Just like snakes, Izuku's people were pushed down and away, looked at with disgust in their eyes or wariness. They were the same in the eyes of society. With one hand he fidgeted around with his earring, the other was holding the strap of his bright yellow backpack tightly. He tried to distract himself from the painful burn on his shoulder. Bakugo really went too far today. Not only did he stomp on the freckled boy's dreams again, he'd physically hurt him more than normal. He could feel it in his shoulder, feel the blood running down his arm. He could smell the nitroglycerin mixed with smoke and wanted to puke. He actually had been suicide-baited for the 73rd time since starting his 9th year of life, hadn't he? Funny how he knew exactly how many times somebody told him to off himself, to pray and get a quirk in his next life. He had many dried red spider lilies at home, now that he thought about it. Of course, the sole purpose of those was to make a point, a cruel one at that, but he also grew up having to manage money. As soon as his father, Midoriya Hisashi, left them when Izuku was 6, money had been relatively tight. His mother had juggled 2, sometimes 3 jobs at the same time, while also looking after him, being a loving mother, and even enrolled him in self-defense classes, which he later on realized cost almost twice as much as it did for quirk children. As soon as he grasped that detail, he went around the neighborhood and asked if he could help them in the garden, or walk their dogs or something for a bit of pocket money. He didn't want to burden his mother anymore. But nobody wanted to give him any work, sending him off with an apologetic smile, or they shouted at him to get lost. So, he tried to make money online. He wrote good comments about some hero and got money for it. That was great. It wasn't much, but he could buy his own notebooks now and didn't need to ask his mama. All the dried flowers were at first carefully flattened between the pages of an old, thick book, and then carefully dried, so that the color didn't fade too much. He kept all of them in a box under his bed. He didn't know why he did it, but he liked them, even if they left behind an uncomfortable feeling in his stomach. Izuku had been in such deep thought that he didn't notice the manhole lid sliding to the side, neither the big man made out of slime creep up behind him. It had already been too late to run, or to shout or scream, because the villain said something about him being the perfect vessel, and all he could feel was the desperation of getting oxygen into his lungs and the rapid heartbeat hammering against his ribcage. He hysterically tried to get out of the assailant's suffocating hold, but he distantly felt his thrashing getting weaker and weaker by the minute. Tears had been running down his cheeks for a long time now, and the sludge tasted like sewage in his mouth. He felt the liquid fill up his lungs, pipes, throat, mouth, nose, everything, and it hurt. It hurt so bad he wanted it to stop. So, he gradually ceased his protest and let himself fall into the blissful feeling of unconsciousness, just when he faintly heard somebody shout something and remotely felt a burst of wind blowing in his direction. Then everything went black. He woke up to somebody slapping him across the face multiple times, and the next thing he knew was that he had talked to All Might, found out his dooming secret about his injury, and that not even the #1 hero believed in him being able to be a hero even without a quirk. You need to be realistic. You can try to be a police officer instead. A quirkless person cannot become a hero. I'm sorry. He had expected it, but it still hurt. Deeply. Sure, he had found a new passion for himself, and he was now, after 8 years of regularly going to the dojo for kung fu and taekwondo, a black belt and all, And he still did his analysis, but it still left his heart in little bits and pieces he was not sure he could muster the strength to pick up. Some of them maybe, but definitely not all of them. And he didn't really have anyone other than his mother to help him with that task. Before he could really register what he was doing, he had climbed over the railing of the building All Might had left him on. He was standing right at the edge and he was leaning forward when an explosion went off a couple blocks to his right. He snapped out of it violently and pulled himself back over the railing. He unceremoniously dumped himself on the floor and took a few deep, shuddering breaths. He was shaking like a leaf and fat tears dropped down in his lap. Deciding that he could have a mental breakdown later at home, in the privacy of his room, he started going home. His feet, however, pulled him into the direction from the explosion from before, and then, yet again, he didn't think about what he was doing and just did what his instincts told him. At first, the heroes on the scene were praising him for his heroic behavior, but as soon as they found out he was quirkless, the praises turned into angry shouts of disapproval, and one of them even told him to stop putting others in unnecessary danger. Well, back to being the one at fault again. For something he didn't do. Swallowing down his own feelings, he got up from the floor, bowed and muttered a quick apology and made his way back home. Nobody got in his way as he did so. In some other universe, Bakugo would have ran after him and told him that he didn't need his help, or All Might searched him out and offered him something, but not in this universe. In this universe, he simply went home, occasionally coughing up remnants of the sludge villain from his lungs onto the sidewalk. Izuku woke up, sweat running down his forehead. He'd had that damned nightmare again. Groaning, he turned, looking at his alarm. 4:37 a.m. If there was anything the Greenette hated more than waking up because of his crippling insomnia, he still had to discover it. Begrudgingly knowing that he would definitely not be going back to sleep anytime soon, he turned on his phone and mindlessly scrolled through a few hero forums and some transcripts from discussions about a new quirk theory going around. The theory itself was based on how one day all the people with villainous quirks would gather and want revenge, and one comment stood out to him. It talked about something like it didn't matter if they stood up for their rights, they would just be overruled anyways, just like the quirkless people were. Insomnicat 027 was right, and Izuku sent them a comment about how he agreed with them, and if they were interested, he'd always try to reply as soon as possible. Leaving it at that, he made his way down to the kitchen and made himself a mug of slightly stronger than usual coffee. He pulled up the recorded version from Put Your Hands Up Radio, and listened to his English teacher talk about the world and simultaneously about nothing at all, and his mood had significantly improved just in time for his mother to wake up to a healthy and nutritious breakfast waiting for her on the table. When he was finished and said his goodbyes to his mother, he went out the door and headed to the train station. Today would finally be a hopefully normal day again, after all that happened the last 2 days. Even though Izuku was a chaos magnet, and basically attracted trouble and chaos, he just hoped he could fall back into the normalcy of going to school at UA and being a normal student. Thank Kami, at least today, Friday, was normal. Well, as normal as can be. Nakamura and the others apologized to him, and Izuku still wasn't used to being the one others apologized to and not the other way around. One good thing came out of the whole USJ incident. He had something to do again in the practical lessons, fine-tuning his ODM gear. And, since he was still a bit stiff from sleeping on the couch yesterday in class, he decided to check out the free gym on UA campus. After saying bye to his friends, he told Maijima-sensei that he would use it for a few hours and then went on his way, a pair of black shorts and a white tank top in one hand and the other clutching his backpack. He went by the general department tract of the school, as well as the marketing department, the business department, design department and the management department, and yet again wondered just how freaking huge this place was. It took him a good 15 minutes to get to the gyms and went into the gym's locker to change after he swiped his UA student ID. Izuku had expected to find unusually many different kinds of equipment. He really did. But this was a sports person's dreams come true. The walls were equipped with many different things to climb on, such as a rock climbing wall, poles, ropes, anything one could think of. There was a secluded area for swinging and training agility in the sky. Slidey on the side were mats for martial arts training, and right next to that were punching bags and wooden boards to kick through, Then of course everywhere was normal gym equipment one could find in an everyday gym, and in every corner stood an automat with protein products and bottles of many different kinds of fluids to drink. About 20 other students from all years from the support course were training on their own, each having headphones or earbuds on their heads or in their ears. A slightly muffled line of curse words got his attention and he looked over to the air agility area. A purple-haired boy was tangled in some kind of fabric and seemed to be stuck, and not even a second later, Aizawa-sensei dropped down as gracefully as a cat next to him. The greenette watched them for a few more seconds and decided to start with his own workout. He put in his own, self-built earphones, and fixed them onto his ears so they wouldn't fall out under any circumstances and went over next to Aizawa and Purple Boy on the mats, beginning his stretching routine. Damn, he really was stiff. Setting on his stretching playlist, he started off slow and steady, and increased the difficulty of his stretches after each song. After 5 short songs, he slowly went into the splits, then into the side splits, not noticing Aizawa watching him subtly from the corners of the teacher's eyes. After around 15 minutes of stretching, he got up and went to grab his boxing bandages, wrapping them around his hands to support them. He started out slow and steady again, going through his usual routine of a mix between taekwondo and kung fu. At first, he did all the various punches he had ingrained in his muscle memory. After that there were the kicks. He'd always preferred the kicks rather than the punches. He didn't really like punching people. After another 10 or so minutes switching in a rhythm of 1 minute only doing punches and 1 minute only doing kicks, he switched his playlist to a more aggressive one and started to go in with a mix of both. By now sweat was running down his neck and forehead, but he didn't stop. His torso was aching with every move he made, his arms and shoulders were protesting too. His legs started to feel like fire and he was sure a trail of sweat could be seen on his back between his shoulder blades, running down his spine. Figuring this was enough of the mix between the two martial arts kinds, he hit his favorite kung fu playlist and started every move he learned in a chronological order on the mats right next to the punching bags. It took him yet again 10 minutes for all 3 of his sets, and at the end of it, he was panting heavily. Curse his lazy ass for not training since the start of UA. Sure, he was a bit occupied with studying and the whole USJ fiasco, but he could have at least gone on the weekend. Making a mental note to go to UA's gym more often during the week, he went over to the vending machines and bought a thirst-canceling protein shake. Downing half of it, he set it down next to his backpack and towel and got ready for his taekwondo set. This one stung badly. His legs had already been tired from before the kung fu workout, and now he was almost only focusing on them. The boy near assaulted the equipment now, accelerated breaths sucking in oxygen and pushing out carbon dioxide, grunts periodically escaping his mouth. Izuku was completely in the void and he loved it. The void only happened when he was so focused on training that he forgot about all of his surroundings, and he stopped thinking, only pushing himself harder and harder, kicking harder and harder, and with quickly increasing speed, faster and faster. As finally his playlist for that set was over, he plopped down on the mat and draped his towel over his shoulders. The unruly green curls were sticking against his forehead now, just like the hair on the back of his neck was drenched in sweat. He quickly calculated how much time he had trained by adding the playlists together, and it resulted in 1.5 hours of pure high-intensity martial arts. He absently reached over to grab his protein shake, chugged down another quarter of it, and got up to do his cool-down stretches, figuring he could focus on weapon training tomorrow at the dojo and maybe on Monday after school. Now it was far easier to bend himself than it was now 2 hours ago, and listening to his cool-down playlist, he deep-stretched every body part in the manner he had learned at the classes in the dojo. That took him 10 minutes again and he was finally finished. Every single part of him was protesting against any kind of micro-movement he did, and he knew he would have sore muscles tomorrow, but he was proud of himself. Sure, he was on the thinner side and most people underestimated him gravely, but he couldn't care less. Back in elementary and middle school he'd had major self-worth issues, especially about his body. He'd always been shorter than the others and skinnier. But that got better the longer he trained. His self-esteem also got better the more he learned to defend himself. The little genius would still subconsciously make himself smaller every time Bakuga bullied him, but with everyone else he managed to keep his head up. Cleaning away the sweat stains with the already provided disinfectant and putting his tank top back on, he'd felt restricted while training and threw it to the side, figuring somebody would tell him if he was distracting them or if they were bothered by it. He went to grab his backpack and the rest of his shake, downing the rest and disposed of it at the nearest trash can. Before he could go to the locker room, however, he felt a hand gripping his arm, stopping him from entering. He turned around and was now holding eye contact with the kid with purple hair from before, the one that was training with Aizawa-sensei. He had the deepest purple eyes Izuku had ever seen, and the white pupils kinda reminded him of Monoma's. Quickly clipping off his earbuds and stopping the music, he turned to completely give him his attention. Anything else would be plain rude. "Hi. Can I help you? Yeah. Would you mind not telling anyone that I'm training with Aizawa-sensei?" Only now did Izuku notice the ridiculously dark eye bags under his eyes. "Oh, yeah, sure, I don't mind. Is everybody else in this gym aware of that?" The teen seemed to relax a bit now. "Oh yeah, I already asked them not to tell. I don't want people to think I'm a favorite or something. Anyways, you've got sick moves, dude. What's your name?" The greenette turned bright red at that. "Thanks, I'm Midoriya Izuku. What's yours?" "Shinso Hitoshi." A couple seconds of awkward silence followed after that, and slowly Izuku grew desperate to say something, so he blurted out a question before he could even think about it. "So why do you train with Aizawa?" "So I can transfer into the heroics course by making an impression in the sports festival." The little inventor looked up at that. "You want to transfer? What department are you from then?" "Definitely not the support department. I'd know you if you were an aspiring supporter." "I'm from Gen Ed, Class 1C. "What class are you in?" "Class 1H, support course. We're the infamous class that randomly blows up every other hour." Shinso let out a snort at that, and Izuku was relieved that the awkwardness from before was gone. He had to go soon though if he wanted to catch the next train and not wait more than an hour. He had been in the gym for about 2 hours. The last lessons for today ended at 15:10 and he started actually working out at 15:30, and now it was 17:40. "Well, Shinso, glad to have met you, but I have to go or I'm gonna miss my train home. If you need any support items for the sports festival, just come to Class 1H and I'll see what I can do." "See ya." "Oh well, thanks I guess." "See ya, Midoriya." "Bye, Shinso." And with that he entered the locker room, took a quick shower and towel-dried his curls to the best of his ability and got ready to walk to the train station. He'd been at school longer than he intended. The sun was already setting, coloring the sky a beautiful yellow, fading into red, purple and then into dark blue in the horizon on the opposite of the sun. Checking again that he had everything with him, he passed under the UA barrier and walked in peace and silence. He didn't have to wait long for his train and thanked whatever deity was out there that it wasn't yet time for the evening rush. He sat down and habitually took out his pepper spray, hiding it in his pocket. He was quirkless after all, and the telltale red shoes didn't make things easier. It wouldn't be the first time that somebody raised a hand against him after all. Around 20 minutes later, he got off and walked back to the apartment complex. His mother and him lived on the 5th floor from the 8th, and the flat was homey and well lived in. He saw the lights burning from here and decided to take the elevator, since his legs were dying right now. Locking the door behind him and slipping out of his shoes and into his indoor slippers, he shouted a quick, "I'm home," and his mother responded with something along the lines of, "Welcome back, baby." Rounding the corner into the kitchen, his nose picked up on the delicious smell of yakitori and rice and spent the rest of the day together with his mom eating and then relaxing in his room. He thought about his encounter with Shinso from Gen Ed and fell asleep soon after. The only reason Shota decided to take Shinso to the support course's gym today is because that gym is the only one you could effectively and safely train air mobility and, for extension, the capture weapon. All the other gyms didn't have it because they were older versions. The gyms had all been built only 4 years ago, but a quirk accident left a giant hole in the wall and ceiling, so to repay the school for the damage, the conveniently architecture department student responsible for the mess offered well-thought-out plans for it. Cementos built the gym but up until now didn't have the time nor the nerve to update the other gyms. The students called it the AA, the air area, and even though it's a silly name, Shota could see the logic behind it and the teachers started calling it that too. After around half an hour, a new kid came in, and he recognized those unruly green curls immediately. That was Midoriya Izuku, support corps student from class 1H, the first ever corkless student accepted to UA. He managed to get Ned's interest just by submitting a ridiculously long pop quiz about analysis. He was the one to perfectly react in a high-stress situation and kept others calm when the alarm sounded in the cafeteria. He played the role of a temporary organizer perfectly. He took out the Nomu and Shigaraki Tamura at the USJ and cussed out All Might. Shota thought back at that moment every now and then and smiled to himself before quickly schooling his expression back into his normal neutral one. Sure, the contents of the cussing were anything but pleasant topics, but the fact that All Might flinched back against the words of a quirkless first year was mildly amusing, even to the Erasure hero. He was the one to have one of the worst panic attacks yesterday morning Aizawa had ever seen. And now he was entering the gym. Shinso and him were training in. What a coincidence! Out of the corner of his eyes and while training Shinso, he watched the kid do some warm-up stretches a few meters next to them on the mats. And damn was he flexible. Not even all of the third years in the heroics course could do the splits or roll themselves backwards and remain in that position for as long as that teenager did. Then he proceeded to practice punches and kicks and several more moves from what Shota knew was Kung Fu and Taekwondo, and he had to admit, he was impressed. It took pretty much to impress the tired man. Midoriya practically screamed formal training, only looking at the perfect form and execution of the punches and the kicks. And when it seemed like Midoriya was completely engrossed into his training, he didn't say anything against it when Shinso got distracted and watched next to him with awe in his eyes. Aizawa was thinking of teaching his student his own fighting style. A mix between street fighting and Muay Thai. At some point the kid yanked off his tank top and Shota narrowed his eyes the same time Shinso hissed. Both of them had already seen the handprint scar on his shoulder, but his back was a whole other story. Starting from somewhere under his shorts, a huge scar stretched all across his back. The form itself was very flame-like and one end of it faintly reached up to his neck, only barely being covered by the normal school uniform. The worst part though was that scar looked old. Almost as old as Todoroki's scar did, and he knew the dual quirk wielder got it when he was somewhere around 5. Shota mentally filed away that information and continued to watch. He knew how quirkless people got treated in this world. He'd saved many of them in his line of duty as an underground hero. So sadly, even though that scar shocked him, it didn't surprise him. He'd have to look into it if Midoriya was safe at home or not. Zashi would definitely say that he was growing soft, but he was genuinely concerned. The rant against All Might and the panic attack yesterday and now the discovery of the huge-ass scar are all worrying indicators which he won't ignore. Same goes for Todoroki. No normal 15-year-old was that emotionally withdrawn. They watched for another 5 minutes and the assault against the equipment got more fierce and faster by the punch/kick, and then he decided to continue Shinso's training. The Gen Ed student tried to figure out how the capture weapon worked, and one moment he was still struggling with it, and the next he was across the gym and talking to Midoriya. The years of experience honed his hearing to an almost unnatural degree, and he followed the conversation with the slightest hint of a smile on his face. Midoriya said bye and Shinso came back and they continued training. Shota didn't miss the slight pink tone on Shinso's face, no matter how hard the teen was trying to hide it. The weekend came and went with no incidents except for one. Somehow May had weaseled her phone number into his own and called him in the middle of the night to discuss one of her ideas with him. She had called him before about an invention, but this time was different. She wanted to hang out. How do you hang out with people? Izuku hasn't hung out with anyone since he was like 4. So obviously he was panicking and pacing up and down in his room, trying to find an outfit and figuring out what people usually did while hanging out. He searched through the internet and only found boring stuff neither he nor May would appreciate doing. His mom was out of the house for a business trip for the next week, and he was quite thankful for that. He was already embarrassed enough that he hadn't even had any friends up until UA. He was still figuring out if that was a fever dream or not though. And the fact that May called at freaking 2:49 in the morning didn't make the situation any better. She startled him awake by calling him, and he wasn't really in the right mind space to tell her no. He didn't want to hang out at almost 3 a.m., but here he was, finally having decided to just wear a black tank top with an old yellow crop top hoodie over it, which wouldn't be an issue if they decided to build something and it got dirty, and a pair of dark blue ripped jeans with his telltale red shoes. Of course, the earrings were a must, and he decided on a few snake-themed rings too. He hesitated a bit with the eyeliner but ultimately decided to paint his waterline with a moss green eyeliner to accentuate his green eyes. There was no use to even try to tame his hair, so he just went through it with his fingers and called it a day, night in this case. He grabbed his wallet, phone, keys and pepper spray, and just to be safe an additional one for May if she forgot hers. He forgot that it wasn't common for quirked people to carry pepper spray around with them, and went on his way, every muscle in his body still protesting from the workout session he had had yesterday. The Pinkette had told him to go to the train station and she'll come and pick him up since she didn't live too far from it. It took him about 15 minutes to arrive, and before he could sit down to wait, he already had her crashing into him in a bone-crushing hug. "Oh my Cammy, you actually came. And holy shit, you look good with that eyeliner. Why don't you wear some at school on Monday? I bet you'd slay them all with your looks." Suddenly Izuku was really happy that he decided to drink 3 espressi before leaving the house and returned her energy. "Hello and good morning to you too, May." "Thanks, I figured it would accentuate my eyes a bit. You also look stunning." Now it was the girl's turn to slightly turn pink. She was wearing cargo pants in the color dark gray with bright red accents and a multitude of tools and grime stains. Her top was a slim fit-tet red crop top, and over it she had an oversized black jacket with white accents. Her white but stained sneaker made a stark contrast to the whole outfit, but she expertly made it work. "Thanks, Izuku. But you're really rocking that crop top hoodie. I swear I could never pull this off like you do." "Nonsense. You can pull anything off if you want to. Now, what invention did you want to talk about? You sounded really into it over the phone." Suddenly standing straighter than his bow staff, she started to bounce up and down, shaking her hands on her sides wildly. Oh. I wanted to ask for your opinion on how you would go about making hover boots. You know, boots that let you hover in the air? Should I put some kind of magnetic shit into the soles that lets you levitate because of the Earth's magnetic thingy? Or do you think I should try and inspire them by how helicopters fly?" Now completely focused on May, Izuku followed her to her house, into her garage, and from there into her own workshop. He had almost everything. Starting from normal everyday tools to welding machines, rotary saw, even a laser cutter. Protesting muscles were completely forgotten and the chaos duo got to work. At around 4 a.m. May's mom came down, a bathrobe thrown over her pajama, and put down 2 cups of water. She didn't trust her daughter with a glass in the workshop. She knew that it wouldn't even be 3 seconds before she would manage to break it despite being at the opposite end of the room. Izuku had politely introduced himself and asked if it was okay to be here, and Hatsume-san, who said to call her Hitomi, assured him it was no problem and that he could come by any time. He also found out why May was so accepting. Her mother had taught her to be respectful with everybody, regardless of gender identity, sexuality, quirk, or job. If Izuku is completely honest, he almost cried at that. Soon after that conversation, they went back to tinkering at the first prototype of the hover boots, and both of them fell into some sort of hyperfocus. Only many hours later, when the sun had long already risen high, did Hitomi come down and bring them lunch. They were so absorbed that both of them forgot about eating, and only now, at 2 p.m. afternoon, 11 hours after they'd started, they felt the hunger. As if on cue, both their stomachs growled loudly, and they spent the entire rest of the day finishing up the hover boots, and it only took 3 explosions until everything worked out perfectly. At around 6 p.m. did Izuku leave and went to his dojo, long overdue for an actual training session. Karasume-sensei was ruthless as always, but it was fun nonetheless. Now he was trotting home again, and it was already dark. He pulled out his pepper spray and hid it in his hand, ready to strike if it was necessary. He did live in the red lights district of Mizudafu, one of the most heavily crime-rated districts of Japan. What made it so dangerous was that the majority of the district was very urban and the houses were pretty old, and most of them were deserted, making perfect hiding spots for illegal activities and groups of villains. Most of them were small-time villains though, so Izuku wasn't too concerned. However, it was also home to quite the number of quirkless people. Which is also why he knew exactly where to go if he ever needed to go to the hospital. Normal hospitals don't really tend to quirkless people, choosing quirked people over them even if they were more urgent cases. So, the community put together money over the span of a few years and bought a 3-story high abandoned building, restored it to their best ability and made an illegal underground clinic out of it. They funded all of that with donations, most of the time from the quirkless people themselves if they could afford it. Izuka himself donates the rest of his lunch money every month. It may not be a lot, but the caretakers of the clinic are always over the moon regardless. The greenette turned another corner and inwardly his soul left his body. 3 men were leaning against the wall a few meters in front of him. Nobody was saying anything and that in itself was very suspicious. He couldn't turn back though, that would make them think he saw something illegal. So, schooling his expression and his stance, he continued to walk into their direction. He could practically feel their eyes on him the whole time and he discreetly reached for the second pepper spray with his other hand in his pocket. He walked past them, eyes on the ground and in front of him, and prayed they wouldn't come after him. About 10 steps later, he heard shuffling and inwardly cursed. They must have seen his red shoes. "Hey boy, what's a lil cutie like you doing here in an alley like this?" Great, they were drunk too. Ignoring the man he continued to walk, but that seemed to be a mistake because the man got angry. "Not gonna answer meh? Ya lil brat, I'll show ya what happens if you disobey meh." Suddenly all 3 of them were running towards Izuku and he started to run Oswell. No point in trying to be subtle now, he already made them angry. Unfortunately one of the other 2 had some sort of speed quirk and caught up to the greenette in the matter of a few seconds and tackled him to the ground. The man was panting into his ear, the smell of alcohol assaulted his nose. Trying to get him off he quickly used one of his self-defense moves but it didn't work. The drunk was too big to get him off and the other 2 were quickly catching up. Taking a deep breath, Izuku screamed. In fact, he almost screamed his lungs out and he was sure he'd have a sore throat for a few days at least. Thanks to hauling big pieces of trash home to tinker around with them, he ripped his arms and hands free, twisted his body and sprayed the pepper spray into the man's eyes. Said man roughly recoiled and the teenager scrambled to his feet and started running again. After a few meters he heard grunts and curses coming from the 2 remaining men and rounded a corner and listened. The grunts and shouted curses continued for a few more seconds and then they stopped completely. Risking a glance he peeked around the corner and relief immediately washed over him. Cautiously he went around the corner again and approached the man that saved his ass. "Thanks, Eraserhead, for having my back there." He sheepishly rubbed his neck. Eraserhead looked him up and down. Then finally he responded. "No problem, Midoriya. But I do have to ask, what are you doing here at this hour? Don't you know that this is one of the most dangerous districts of Japan?" "Oh yeah, I know that. I live around here and I was on my way home from a friend's when those perverts started chasing me. But it's no big deal, this happens pretty often around here." The pro hero looked at him with a look that almost screamed, "I'm done with this shit. Kid, this is a big deal. Thank Cammy I was here or who knows what could have happened to you. 3 against 1, your chances of escaping were pretty slim, judging by the fact that one of them has a speed quirk." Realizing that he could have actually been in a lot more danger than he originally thought, he dropped his gaze towards the ground, fiddling with the hems of his hoodie nervously. "Well, if you say it like that then it sure does sound bad." The man let out a deep sigh and went to crouch before him. "Yeah, that's because it was. But it's fine now, you're safe. Are you hurt anywhere or feeling cold? You're shaking pretty badly." Blinking and looking down on his hands, he saw that he was in fact shaking like a leaf and when he wanted to respond he suddenly couldn't. It felt like his throat had closed off and no sound escaped from his mouth whatsoever. He opened his mouth and tried again and again, but no sound wanted to leave him. And because it felt like his throat was closed he noticed how he couldn't breathe anymore too and everything was closing in on him, the walls, the dumpster, and his heartbeat was really loud now too. Unexpectedly a hand firmly but gently took one of his shaking ones and put it against his chest and the other hand was also taken and put onto the person's chest in front of him. Izuku felt it rise and fall evenly and he tried to match his breathing attempts with theirs but it didn't work. It didn't work and he felt his knees give out, he still couldn't breathe and it felt like he was being drowned by the sludge villain again. By now tears streamed down his face and suddenly he was hugged? That kind of feels familiar? long arms wrapped around him and one side of his face was now pressed against someone's chest. He could hear their heartbeat and tried to focus on that. When finally his own heartbeat wasn't pounding in his head anymore, he turned his focus on the rising and falling rhythm of the person's breathing and tried to match it again, and this time, thank Kami, it worked. Slowly everything came back to him and he took a deep shuddering breath before pulling away. He looked up at Eraserhead and realized he was sitting on the floor against the wall with him, and the underground hero was still hugging him partially, and holding him with one arm draped partly over his shoulder, partly over his upper back, and the other was supporting him with a firm grip on his lower arm. "It's okay, you're safe, nobody can hurt you." The black-haired pro looked him deep in the eyes, and never has Izuku seen such a soft expression on his face. "Can you hear me now?" The teen tried to say yes, but yet again no sound came out and he let out a frustrated noise. "Nod or shake your head for me if you think you can speak right now or not, please. It's okay if the answer is no, just nod or shake your head." After some more attempts he ultimately gave up and shook his head. Why couldn't he talk? This has never happened before. Sure, after the sludge villain he wasn't really up for talking either, but never could he not speak at all. "Okay, that's okay. I'm gonna ask you yes or no questions now and you are gonna nod or shake your head for me, okay?" He didn't like it, but he complied anyways. It was no use to protest anyways and it would be extremely illogical. "Okay, good. Are you physically hurt somewhere, like for example scrapes or anything?" How did the teacher in front of him know exactly what was wrong with him? He did scrape both his knee and one arm on the concrete. So he nodded. "Can you show me?" Reluctantly Izuku reached down and pulled up his jeans, good thing he chose baggy jeans, and Aizawa quickly wrapped it up in bandages. The scrape was pretty deep and he should let it get checked out by a doctor soon. Izuku knew that he wouldn't do that and pulled back his sleeve on his left hand. This one was just as deep as the one on his knee, and before he could even blink his arm was wrapped up in bandages just like his knee was. Right, was that all? Good. Now where do you live? I'm gonna make sure you get home safe and wanna drop you off with your parents? He shook his head and Aizawa raised an eyebrow. "You don't want me to accompany you home?" The boy frantically shook his head again. He didn't have a problem with being escorted home, but his mother wasn't home. "Is it your parents?" He nodded so fast he almost got whiplash. However, he didn't see the next question coming at all. "Midoriya, are you safe at home? Do your parents hurt you in any way?" Yet again, he shook his head so fast he almost got dizzy. His mother was the nicest woman on earth. Why would he think that? Okay, that's a relief. After seeing the big scar on your back yesterday in the gym and the handprint on your shoulder, I was worried there for a sec. Are you sure your parents aren't hurting you? Now that he thought about it, how could he have been so stupid? Of course the people in UA would be concerned for his safety after seeing that horrendous scar. Sure, it was old and partially faded, but it is huge. His father had burnt him to a crisp right before he vanished and moved to America when he was 4.5. As for the handprint, his mother didn't even know about it. Suddenly a thought struck him. He put his hands up and started to use sign language. He'd learned it because he didn't really have friends, but one time a nice little family was living right below them and the child was deaf. So he learned it to kill time and to be able to communicate with the kid. Sadly, after about 2 years they moved and he hasn't heard from him since. Sign. Eraser's brows went up at that. Yeah, I can sign. I didn't know you know sign language. I learned it as a child. My parents aren't hurting me. Well, my father did, he's the one I've got that big scar on my back from, but he's been out of the picture since I was 4.5. I don't really want to talk about him. My mother is the best mom you could ever wish for. I'm sorry that happened to you and sorry that I doubted your mother. Now let's go, I want to make sure your mother is okay, this is a dangerous neighborhood after all. Shaking his head again, he continued signing. You can escort me home, but my mother is on a business trip right now. She won't come home until next week Saturday, so you can't meet her. Alright. Thank you for telling me. Now lead the way please. Both of them stood up and the adults supported him for the first few steps, and then let him go and fell into step next to him. The walk home was spent in silence, for one because Izuku still couldn't speak, and two because Aizawa was keeping a watchful eye on both their surroundings and on Izuku. Finally rounding the last corner, he stopped in front of the door and turned around to his sensei. Do you know why I can't talk anymore? Oh, sorry about that, I forgot to explain that to you. I think this is a case of selective mutism, but I can't be too sure. From what I could see, you panicked because you suddenly couldn't talk anymore, right? Okay, that means that from time to time you can't talk because your brain subconsciously searches for a coping mechanism after a high-stress situation. In your case, it was you almost being assaulted. Izuku had read about selective mutism before, but he hadn't thought that this is what it would feel like. He signed a thank you to the man and they quickly parted ways. He knew Aizawa was going to wait until he could see the lights going out before continuing his patrol. So he rode up the elevator to the 5th floor, locked the door behind him and made quick work to shower and get to bed. The last hour was way too stressful and the exhaustion was rolling over him like a tsunami right now. He plugged in his phone, deactivated his alarm since tomorrow is Sunday, and switched off the lights, almost promptly falling asleep.